Chapter 1439, Amazing. 3. Chapter 1439, Amazing. 3. June Linyuan acted as though she was some waitress. However, since he had helped her, Feng Wu decided to let him be. She quickly fetched a plate of fish-flavored sliced pork over rice and set it down in front of June Linyuan. Seeing the food, June Linyuan gave Feng Wu a resigned look and smirk. "Feng Wu, you sure know how to choose the easy way out." Feng Wu said, "What did I do?" The Crown Prince almost rolled his eyes. "Can't you tell?" Feng Wu said, "This type of food is very filling. What's wrong with it? You didn't say I had to make a certain number of dishes. Moreover," Feng Wu glared at June Linyuan, "do you know how difficult it was to make this fish-flavored sliced pork? I had to create a separate essence-gathering formation just to get the spiritual essence in the food perfect." June Linyuan pursed his lips. "You're such a braggart." No one else believed her either. She had set up a formation just to cook a dish. To be more precise, her cooking needed a formation? That was preposterous. No one would believe Feng Wu. Feng Wu didn't know what to say. "Just try it and you'll see." The fish-flavored sliced pork and rice combined so that their fragrances covered each other, which was why the dish didn't have much of a smell. But in fact, it really was very tasty. However, since June Linyuan wouldn't touch it, the others didn't dare to eat either. Feng Wu thus sat down next to June Linyuan and looked at him with her big bright eyes. "Your Royal Highness, just try it." June Linyuan almost rolled his eyes. It was a spicy dish. He could tell from the smell. Everyone around him knew that he didn't touch anything spicy, so if he ate it now, he would be so humiliated. Hence, June Linyuan threw down the chopsticks he had just picked up. Feng Wu stared at June Linyuan in bewilderment. What did he do that for? June Linyuan. What the hell is this? Is it human food? June Linyuan glared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu was speechless. She wanted to lose it, but she knew better than to yell at June Linyuan. She couldn't afford to be mad at him. The man was all about saving face. If she got mad at him in front of all these people, the consequences would be unimaginable. This man wouldn't be forced. Hence, Feng Wu tugged at June Linyuan's sleeve and spoke in a low voice that only he could hear. "June Linyuan, Your Royal Highness, please try it. I almost cut my finger off when I made the dish. Please try it." She sounded so pitiful. It had to be said that Feng Wu finally understood June Linyuan a little better. The Crown Prince enjoyed it a lot when she held his arm and pleaded with him. Ahem. June Linyuan looked up and threw a dirty look at Feng Wu. "Behave yourself. Everyone's watching." He brushed Feng Wu's arm off as he spoke. Feng Wu was speechless. What a... The others all gave Feng Wu strange looks, especially Zhen Xia, whose smirk had grown even more wider. That Feng Wu is throwing herself into the Crown Prince's arms. Does she have no shame at all? Chapter 1440, Untitled. Chapter 1440, Untitled. Zhen Xia clearly wasn't the only one who thought that way. A lot of people agreed with her. They all thought that the Crown Prince would keep telling Feng Wu off before he walked away. To their surprise, June Linyuan only casually chided her then. He picked up the chopsticks and glared at Feng Wu. "Don't you have any spoons?" Feng Wu's eyes snapped open. "Yes, of course I do. Here's a spoon." Feng Wu immediately brought him a porcelain spoon. She had prepared special tableware for June Linyuan, but he was sitting in the dining hall and there wasn't enough room to spread out the entire set of tableware. Immediately, everyone stared at June Linyuan in disbelief. Oh God, His Royal Highness was eating it. He really was. I thought His Royal Highness didn't eat spicy food. And I thought he couldn't even stand the smell of it. Isn't His Royal Highness very picky about his food? Isn't he? None of them could believe that the respectable June Linyuan would eat such simple food, not to mention that it was a spicy dish, his least favorite taste. To their surprise, Jun Linyuan ate it. He frowned when he took the first bite, and looked like he was going to flare up the next moment. Everyone held their breaths, fearing that he might direct his anger at them. However, they waited and waited, but nothing happened. The Crown Prince then ate another spoonful. And the crowd was speechless. Everyone's eyes widened. How was that even possible? They were already very surprised when the Crown Prince didn't lose his temper, but he had taken another bite. Exactly how considerate was he? They thought that Jun Linyuan would stop after 2 bites and put down the spoon. However, the Crown Prince wouldn't stop eating. Everyone was speechless. They were so shocked that they didn't know how to express their feelings. His Royal Highness is still eating, so maybe it's actually quite nice. What are you thinking? It's just some rice with a little bit of meat and vegetables. How can it be tasty? I'll chop my own head off if that thing tastes good. You have a point. Miss Feng had to cook for 3,000 people, so taste would be her last concern. It's already very amazing that she could cook a meal at all. Since His Royal Highness is eating it, let's show Miss Feng some respect as well. They had to admit that His Royal Highness was being very nice to Feng Wu. Despite the big frown on his face, he was still trying to support her. Zhenxia and the others exchanged looks, and all of them frowned. How could His Royal Highness stand such food? That was so infuriating. Many servants felt just as indignant. Chang San used to have 3 deputies, and after he left, one of them known as Ho Si was promoted. Like Feng Sun, Ho Si was quite a lively man. A plate of food was right in front of him at the moment, so he rolled up his sleeves and chuckled. Since His Royal Highness has started, I'm going to have my dinner as well. Let me try Miss Wu's great cooking. Ho Si believed that he had to take his young master's side. If His Royal Highness was on Miss Feng Wu's side, he should be as well. No matter how horrible the food tasted, he had to say that it was delicious. Chapter 1441 Untitled. Chapter 1441 Untitled. Hence, Ho Si picked up a spoonful of food, closed his eyes and stuffed it into his mouth. As soon as the food entered his mouth, dense spiritual essence filled his mouth, waking up all his taste buds. Holy shit! Ho Si was astonished. How could anything be so delicious? When he swallowed the food, the satisfying sensation was indescribable. After standing there in astonishment for 3 seconds, Ho Si finally returned to his senses. He opened his eyes and gave Jun Linyuan an accusing look. The Crown Prince was such a good actor. Ho Si had thought that the Crown Prince was forcing himself to eat because he was trying to help Feng Wu save some dignity, but the truth was, it was so delicious. After tasting the dish, Ho Si resumed eating and wolfed down the food on the plate. It wasn't just because it was delicious. Ho Si had the distinct feeling that this food was going to benefit his cultivation greatly. The others were amazed by the way Ho Si ate. There was a reason it was Ho Si who took over Chang San's position. The man was such a great actor. 2 brothers known as Luo Bai and Luo He looked at each other in bewilderment. They were both Ho Si's subordinates. Captain, isn't that a bit over the top? Is that thing really so tasty? Luo Bai, the livelier one, asked. Luo He also stared at Ho Si. Ho Si immediately shook his head. No, it's not tasty at all. The others saw the light. They were right. Ho Si glanced at Luo Bai before shifting his gaze to the plate in Luo Bai's hands. It's not worth eating. I'm sure you don't want it. Surprised, Luo Bai nodded in bewilderment. The next second, Ho Si snatched the plate out of his hands. What? Before everyone else realized what was happening, Ho Si had eaten Luo Bai's portion. He then reached out to Luo He asking, "You don't want this, right? Don't let it go to waste." Luo He wasn't stupid. He found it very strange that Ho Si wouldn't stop eating when he said the food wasn't good at all. Hence, Luo He scooped up some and put it into his mouth. Ho Si's face immediately darkened. The next second, Luo Hei's face darkened as well. Without another word, he raised the plate and poured everything into his mouth. Thump. Ho-Si was exasperated. Since when are you so fast? Ho-Si was the captain of the guards, and Luo Bai and Luo Hei were his capable assistants. Naturally, the others paid a lot of attention to them. They saw how vexed Ho-Si was. Because of that, they looked at one another in bewilderment. Then, Ho-Si, Luo Bai, and Luo Hei involuntarily looked around at the other servants, and the look in their eyes gave them the creeps. Just then, rumble. A fluctuation of spiritual essence spread out from Ho-Si. Even Ho-Si himself was astonished. He had made a breakthrough. Everyone gave him strange looks. Ho-Si was quite capable already, and it was very difficult for someone at his level to make a breakthrough. He had been stuck in this bottleneck for a very long time. He had thought that it would be years before he made another breakthrough. Therefore, this one was such a big surprise. Chapter 1442, Untitled. Chapter 1442, Untitled. I made a breakthrough? Ho-Si mumbled and looked completely baffled. I really have. How? Am I dreaming? Not only couldn't Ho-Si understand it, neither could the others. What did Ho-Si do? Why did he suddenly make a breakthrough? That's right. I've never seen any more make a breakthrough during a meal. Captain Ho, how did that happen? Luo Bai was baffled. Just then, Luo Hei realized what happened. Without another word, he turned around and stared at the person behind him. You don't want this, do you? Ho-Si revealed the secret, ruining Luo Hei's plan. There's pure spiritual essence in this dish, which will benefit your cultivation greatly. He didn't need to say more. Everyone had seen Captain Ho make a breakthrough because of the dish. At that thought, they all grew excited. The next second, almost everyone started wolfing down the food. The taste wasn't the most important thing anymore. There was spiritual essence in it, and that was all they cared about. The spiritual essence exploded on their tongues when the food was in their mouths, and finally, those who didn't believe in Feng Wu were convinced. Captain Ho was right. Rumble. Either Feng Wu's liquid spiritual essence was very potent, or a lot of people were in the bottleneck stage. With some buzzing sounds, 5 people made breakthroughs in a row. Everyone was speechless. One person could be considered a coincidence, but there were at least 5 cases now. Coincidence couldn't explain them all. Oh God! That's amazing! Is it really because of the food? The food. Miss Feng Wu made the dish with her own hands. Immediately, all eyes were on Feng Wu. Feng Wu was shocked as well. She knew she was an excellent cook and was aware of the liquid spiritual essence she put in the food, but she didn't expect it to be so potent. 5 people had made breakthroughs, which sounded just a little too scary. Miss Feng. Luo Bai was the first to react, and he had never felt so regretful in his life. Miss Feng, do you still have some food left? Luo Bai was so frustrated, because his captain had eaten his own. Otherwise, he might have made a breakthrough as well. Feng Wu said, well that. His gaze was so intense that Feng Wu felt a little abashed. She could only give him a wry smile and said, I only made 1 portion for each person, and there's nothing left. Sorry about that. Luo Hei rushed over and knocked Luo Bai out of the way. He stood in front of Feng Wu and asked excitedly, Miss Feng Wu, what about the wok you used? The wok? Feng Wu was confused. Did they want to wash it for her? She turned around and pointed at the giant iron wok on the stove. It was big enough to cook food for 3,000 people. Feng Wu pointed at the giant wok. The next second, 2 shadows flitted across the courtyard, and before she realized it, Luo Bai and Luo Hei had dashed off. My wok! No, it's my wok. Chapter 1443, Untitled. Chapter 1443, Untitled. Luo Hei, you've eaten your portion already. Why are you trying to take this from me? Luo Bai. You were dumb enough to let the captain fool you. I had nothing to do with that. I don't care. I'm your older brother. You have to respect me. I'm the younger brother, so you should indulge me. Luo Bai and Luo He were two brothers whom Jun Linyuan had picked up from the side of the road. They were at the most noisy age. To Feng Wu's surprise, the twins ended up burying their heads in the wok and started licking the sauce inside. The look on Feng Wu's face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. However, Feng Wu was the only one who looked so astonished, because the rest of the members of the residence all eyed the twins with envy. Even Ho Si swallowed and took a few steps forward. However, his dignity as captain prevailed, and he stopped moving closer. Before long, the twins had licked the wok so clean that it seemed like it had been washed, the inside bright enough to reflect light. Feng Wu's eyes widened. She couldn't understand this world anymore. Meanwhile, Zhenxia frowned and said in a low voice, "Even if the food was full of spiritual essence, should they lower themselves like that? The Luo brothers are going too far." Those around her shook their heads as well. "That's right. That's so humiliating. He may not even make a breakthrough." Rumble. To everyone's surprise, Luo Bai, who had been licking the wok like a dog, made a breakthrough the next second. Feng Wu was speechless. Zhenxia didn't know what to say. Nor did everyone else. Luo Bai was so excited that he was almost in tears. Oh God. Oh my God. He had made a breakthrough. He couldn't believe it. Luo Bai was so excited that he was almost in tears. Everyone was astonished. Their gazes shifted from Luo Bai to Feng Wu, and they all looked at her in disbelief. Even Zhenxia, who wouldn't believe it at first, had to admit that Feng Wu's food could indeed help with cultivation. Even Jun Linyuan was giving Feng Wu a strange look. It was a mix of pride and resignation. He then rose to his feet and walked away. A hush fell over the room. He halted after a few steps and looked at Feng Wu over his shoulder. Although he didn't say anything, his sharp gaze was more than enough to deliver the message. What choice did Feng Wu have? She could only follow him out. Jun Linyuan went straight to his bedchamber. Feng Wu stood outside and hesitated. Wasn't it a bit inappropriate for her to go in? She was still hesitating, when some pretty teenage girls walked toward her in 2 rows. They moved elegantly, and their curves were so soft that they seemed boneless. Each of them held a red tray in their hands, and some had lukewarm water on it. Feng Wu moved aside to let them pass. The girls gave Feng Wu warm and friendly smiles when they spotted her. Feng Wu rubbed her chin. Because of her beauty, very few girls had been friendly to her when she was growing up. Chapter 1444, Untitled. Chapter 1444, Untitled. Through the open door, Feng Wu saw the girls put down their things in the room before they quietly came back out. They smiled at Feng Wu again on their way out, and they were very sweet smiles. However, it gave Feng Wu the creep. What was going on? "Come in," she heard Jun Linyuan's cold voice. Feng Wu's stomach lurched. Something felt off, but it was impossible to resist Jun Linyuan's pressure. However, she put up one last struggle. Jun Linyuan snorted in the room. "I thought you agreed to work as my humble servant. Are you going to go back on your word?" Feng Wu was speechless. What other choice did she have? She could only inch toward Jun Linyuan, moving as slowly as she could manage. The crown prince looked at the way she lowered her head and was very amused. Did she think the work would disappear if she stalled for time? The longer she put it off, the worse it would be. "Come over here." Jun Linyuan patted the stool by his bed and gestured at Feng Wu to come closer. Feng Wu pouted and stared at him. Jun Linyuan ignored her and lay down on the bed, resting his head on his hands. Looking from the basins of hot water to Jun Linyuan's casual demeanor, Feng Wu was dumbfounded. "This is..." The crown prince glanced at Feng Wu and asked, "What do you think?" Feng Wu said, Please don't tell me that I have to wash your hair for you. The Crown Prince nodded. Feng Wu said, Jun Linyuan, are you a 3-year-old? Can't you wash your hair on your own? Why do you need other people to wash it for you? Jun Linyuan's face darkened. Feng Wu said, plus, so many pretty young maids were here just then, why didn't you ask them? Why me? No, I'm not doing it. The Crown Prince gave her a half-smile and asked, Are you disobeying my order now? Feng Wu said, Humph. Yes, I am. So what? Jun Linyuan gave her a cold glance. Leave, then. Outside, Feng was speechless. Your Royal Highness, you have to talk nicely to girls. Can't you be a little softer? You'll never win Miss Feng Wu's heart like this. Feng Wu was baffled. She had expected Jun Linyuan to be mad, but never thought that he would kick her out. Feng Wu was speechless. She stood there and didn't know what to do. She couldn't leave, because the 6th trial had been extended to 18 days, and it was only 99% complete at the moment. If she walked away now, she would fail. Therefore, she couldn't leave. Gritting her teeth, Feng Wu stomped her foot and wanted to smack her own head. Why did she have to be so stubborn? She had to live with the consequences now. What choice did she have? For her broken star pieces, she had to stay. In the end, Feng Wu had to rub her forehead to get rid of the frown, and she inched back toward Jun Linyuan. Sitting down on the stool, she was about to untie Jun Linyuan's hair, when he sat up. Feng Wu was confused. What are you doing? The Crown Prince gave her an arrogant glance and said indifferently, I don't deserve your service. You can go now. Jun Linyuan then pointed at the door, telling Feng Wu to get out. Feng Wu was speechless. If you don't want to serve me, just leave, the Crown Prince said proudly. Feng Wu was speechless. She wanted to go. She wished she could leave now and never come back. Chapter 1445. Chapter 1445, Untitled. The last thing she wanted was to become his little maid. But she didn't have a choice. She had to wake her beautiful master up, and that task was more important than her life. Therefore, Feng Wu took a deep breath to calm down. She had tried the gentle approach, but Jun Linyuan was still so arrogant, so she had to change her method. Putting on a serious look, Feng Wu glared at Jun Linyuan and pushed him back down. Hey! That's enough. Sit yourself down. Jun Linyuan glared at Feng Wu and wondered why she dared to yell at him. However, before he could react, Feng Wu had forced him to sit down. And the Crown Prince let her. The way Feng Wu washed his hair was quite rough, because she needed to get it done as soon as possible. However, Feng Wu, be gentle. Feng Wu, do you even know how to serve others? Feng Wu, you. The Crown Prince, who was known for being reticent and aloof, was yelling like an angry young lion now. Outside, Feng and Granny Gong exchanged looks and shook their heads. Miss Wu was amazing. The Crown Prince only behaved like a normal teenager around her. Inside, Feng Wu finally finished washing Jun Linyuan's long black hair. Jun Linyuan had ordered her around the entire time. He was as difficult as always. He had no fewer rules for washing his hair than when he took a bath. At his request, Feng Wu rinsed his hair as many as 9 times, and she was exhausted. Luckily, it was finally over. Feng Wu fetched a thick towel, wrapped it around Jun Linyuan's black hair, and heaved a sigh. Serving Jun Linyuan was so draining. She would rather go through hell 9 times than follow his orders. Hearing the sounds inside, someone outside soon opened the door. The maids from earlier filed in again, and within minutes, they tidied everything up and left the room when Feng Wu was still feeling baffled. Feng Wu was about to go out when she heard Jun Linyuan snort. Where are you going? She looked back at Jun Linyuan in bewilderment. I thought we're done here. Jun Linyuan smirked. Leave, then. Feng Wu was speechless. She knew it couldn't be that easy. Jun Linyuan had asked her to wash his hair repeatedly, and to give him a head massage. It had taken Feng Wu over an hour to do everything. "What do you want now?" Feng Wu sounded very impatient. The Crown Prince was very sensitive, and he immediately detected her impatience. He snorted and looked away. His attitude was very obvious. Feng Wu was speechless. "Jun Linyuan, are you asking me to dry your hair now?" Feng Wu asked grumpily. Jun Linyuan rolled his eyes and gave Feng Wu an accusing look. Feng Wu rubbed her own forehead. She was so baffled. "Your Royal Highness, you're a very capable cultivator with the fire attribute. Activate your spiritual essence and your hair will dry instantly." Why did he have to dry his hair with a towel? That was so. Chapter 1446, Untitled. Chapter 1446, Untitled. The Crown Prince immediately flushed. He glared at Feng Wu and said, "So, you're going to leave before your work is done?" Feng Wu felt so helpless. "You can solve that problem by simply moving a finger, so why do you have to order me around? Do I look like an easy target?" Jun Linyuan glared at Feng Wu. "Go then. Now." Feng Wu was speechless. She wanted to smack her own head again. She had only just warned herself not to get mad at Jun Linyuan, but she had forgotten again. She still had the 6th trial. Feng Wu took a deep breath and forced herself to calm down. She raised both hands over her head. "Fine, fine. Drying your hair, is it? No problem." She knew that if they continued quarreling, she would have to charm Jun Linyuan again later. So why bother? Seeing that Feng Wu didn't even want to quarrel with him, Jun Linyuan felt even more frustrated. But he also knew that he had pushed Feng Wu to the brink of losing her temper. Feng Wu walked up to him and ripped off the thick towel wrapped around his head. She was quite rough about it. Jun Linyuan frowned involuntarily. The room felt a little stuffy. After that, Feng Wu's hands started to emit warm energy, and it was getting stronger. She was going to dry Jun Linyuan's hair with her fire energy. That way she could do it in less than a minute. But just then, she heard Jun Linyuan's cold voice. "Is that how you're going to deal with my hair?" Feng Wu stopped rubbing and looked at Jun Linyuan in bewilderment. "What are you talking about? This is the quickest way." However, once his hair was dry, he would run out of excuses to keep her here. He looked at Feng Wu and said, "It'll damage my hair." Feng Wu almost choked on her own breath. Damage his hair? I didn't know a man like you would care about the quality of your health. Jun Linyuan, you're so full of surprises. Feng Wu chuckled. The Crown Prince looked abashed, and he glared at Feng Wu. "Leave then. Please don't say that." Feng Wu waved her hands. "I'm not going anywhere until my work is done here. I have to make sure that you're all comfortable." After that, she fetched a thick towel to rub Jun Linyuan's hair. "Did I force you to stay?" the Crown Prince asked grumpily. Feng Wu said, "No, of course you didn't. How is that possible? I love this job." The Crown Prince snorted. However, Jun Linyuan had a lot of requests even when his hair was being dried. There was a different towel for each round. Feng Wu had to go back and forth and do as she was told. Luckily, she was getting better at controlling her anger, and she was able to get through this by reciting the Vajraketaka Sutra in her head. However, the scripture made her feel more and more sleepy. In the end, she could barely keep her eyes open. "Hey!" Thinking that Feng Wu was being lazy, Jun Linyuan poked her little head. However, Feng Wu slid down and fell toward Jun Linyuan. When he realized what had happened, Feng Wu was already snoring a little. "She's asleep?" The Crown Prince was amazed. What he didn't know was... Chapter 1447, What Did You Do to Me? Chapter 1447, What Did You Do to Me? Feng Wu had been working for him since that morning and was exhausted. It was only natural that she felt sleepy. You're such a careless girl, falling asleep like this. June Linyuan wanted to jab a finger into Feng Wu's head, but when his hand touched her, it caressed her softly. June Linyuan already had well-defined features, and the dim moonlight coming in from the window only accentuated them. Raising his straight black eyebrows, June Linyuan stared at Feng Wu with his glittering eyes, completely absorbed. Despite his usual domineering and majestic self, he was looking at her with such gentle eyes that he seemed to be as calm as the wind and the moon. Feng Wu liked to move around in her sleep. She rolled toward June Linyuan. With a thump, Feng Wu was in June Linyuan's arms. The Crown Prince's eyes widened and he stiffened when he felt Feng Wu in his arms. Talk about walking into one's own trap. He had an example right in front of him. Humph. June Linyuan thought, you may deny your feelings all the time, but your body is very honest. No one could stay calm when they had a soft body in their arms, not to mention that she was the girl he liked. Seeing the girl's stunning face, the Crown Prince lowered his head toward her. June Linyuan's mouth touched Feng Wu's soft lips, and he was so happy when, ding! Feng Wu's clear, black eyes snapped open. They were still so close, and their lips were touching. When their eyes met, they were both shocked. Caught red-handed, the Crown Prince was astonished, and his head went blank. The next second, he involuntarily pushed Feng Wu away. Crash! Poor Feng Wu. Before she knew what was going on, she was spinning in the air, and then fell to the floor. The Crown Prince blushed in embarrassment when he heard the crisp sound. Feng Wu had been sleeping, but the fall woke her up. She landed on her butt. Although there was no real damage, it still hurt a lot, and tears welled up in her eyes. Feng Wu stared at June Linyuan in vexation and bewilderment. What are you doing? The Crown Prince was speechless. Pursing his lips, he tightened his jaw and looked at Feng Wu rather guiltily. Rubbing her back, Feng Wu slowly got to her feet and looked down at June Linyuan, who was sitting in bed. She then accused him. June Linyuan, you kissed me without my permission, and you kicked me. The second accusation didn't bother him, but he would never admit to the first. If he admitted it, he would be admitting that he was secretly in love with Feng Wu. That would never happen. The Crown Prince fought back. Glancing at Feng Wu, he crossed his arms and said slowly, Feng Wu, don't pretend to be innocent. Don't you know what you did? Feng Wu's stomach lurched. What did I do? The Crown Prince snorted. Don't you remember? Baffled, Feng Wu scratched her head and started thinking. She remembered how June Linyuan had been ordering her around, telling her to wash his hair and towel dry it. She became sleepy as she rubbed, and she didn't remember anything after that. Chapter 1448, Untitled. Chapter 1448, Untitled. Just tell me, what on earth did I do? Feng Wu was a little flustered, because she couldn't recall anything. June Linyuan gave Feng Wu an arrogant glance. Seeing how righteous he looked, Feng Wu felt even more guilty. Hey, just tell me. June Linyuan grunted. So, you're going to deny it after everything you did? What? Feng Wu's eyes widened. After what I did? What on earth did I do? Heh! The Crown Prince snorted. You're supposed to work as my maid, but you've been drooling all over me. Talk about throwing the blame on other people. The Crown Prince was trying very hard to prove that he wasn't in love with Feng Wu. Feng Wu was furious, and she glared at June Linyuan. Impossible! I would never drool over you. Even if I did, it would be over. My beautiful master. The Crown Prince didn't notice the last bit of her claim and went on grumbling. That's not even the worst bit. You then caught me off guard, climbed into my bed, and wouldn't let go of me. And you know the rest. That was a very serious accusation. Feng Wu could stand the previous one, but this second part set her off. Her face went scarlet red, and she could barely form a coherent sentence. I climbed into your bed? Impossible. The Crown Prince casually glanced at her. If you hadn't, why did you fall off? Feng Wu said, well, anyway, the climbing into bed part never happened. The Crown Prince said, it did. Feng Wu said, no, I didn't do that. The Crown Prince said, yes, you did. Feng Wu said, no, no, no. Jun Linyuan snorted and glanced at Feng Wu. He then said sarcastically, little Feng Wu, what did you do today? Why are you so desperate tonight? Feng Wu clenched her fists in frustration. She couldn't help but recall what happened earlier today. Today was the Immortal Flower Festival, and a lot of very suggestive things happened in the grove. Jun Linyuan glanced at Feng Wu, crossed his hands behind his back, and asked in a solemn tone, aren't you too young to think about such things? You shouldn't surrender to your desires. Feng Wu. She now knew what it meant to give a dog a bad name and hang him. She almost had a stroke. She could neither retort nor fight him, and the frustration made her tremble from head to toe. Seeing how defeated Feng Wu was, the Crown Prince was over the moon. That's what you get for laughing at me earlier today. It's never too late to take revenge. As smart as Feng Wu was, Jun Linyuan was the only one who could irritate her like this. Frustrated, she clenched her fists and ran out the door. Hey! Feng Wu! Stop! Realizing that he had stepped out of line, he called after her. But Feng Wu ignored him. The door was yanked open and then slammed shut. Running out after Feng Wu, Jun Linyuan almost smashed his nose into the door. Ahem! Feng and Granny Gong had been standing outside the door the entire time, so they heard everything. The Crown Prince looked embarrassed when he saw them at first, but the proud teenager immediately glared at them. Chapter 1449, Doesn't She Know Shame? Chapter 1449, Doesn't She Know Shame? Granny Gong was too timid to speak. But not Feng. He could speak freely even in front of Emperor Wu. Ahem, Your Royal Highness. Feng said patiently, when a girl is mad, the sooner you try to appease her, the easier it will be. It'll be very difficult to make her happy if you leave it for too long. Jun Linyuan had wanted to find Feng Wu, but he realized what he was doing when he heard Feng. Me appease her? Feng, you must be out of your mind. He then shut the door from inside. Feng was speechless. Granny Gong heaved a sigh. I'll go talk nicely to Miss Wu. Her young master had made the mess, but she had to clean up after him. Feng nodded in resignation. Feng Wu dashed off in frustration. She ran all the way out of the Crown Prince's residence, and back to the Feng Manor. She bumped into a person outside Fallen Star Yard. Watch where you're going, the person cried out. After recognizing Feng Wu, she immediately shut up. It was none other than Feng Lu herself, and Dugumingshi was with her. Although she had lost her baby, she and Lady Wang had somehow managed to make Dugumingshi care even more for Feng Lu, and they were preparing for an engagement reception. Feng Lu was furious when she saw Feng Wu. Dugumingshi didn't like Feng Wu either, both from what happened before and because of the humiliation which Dugu Yamo had gone through today. Feng Wu ignored them and walked straight in. Feng Wu, stop right there. As the favorite son of the Dugu family, Dugumingshi had never been ignored like this. Feng Wu had a fierce energy about her when she was in a bad mood, so she turned around and stared at Dugumingshi with her cold gaze. Dugumingshi was a spoiled young heir, and that murderous look was more than he could take. His stomach lurched and he felt a chill run down his spine. Feng Wu, how dare you? Are you trying to hurt young Master Dugu? Feng Lu had dealt with Feng Wu quite a few times, so she wasn't as intimidated. Feng Wu's gaze swept over them before she turned around to go inside. Just then, the door to Fallen Star Yard opened, and Granny Zhao appeared in the doorway. Seeing that the door was open, Feng Lu knew that her voice could easily be heard inside, so she snorted and said, Feng Wu, after what you've done, how dare you come back? Do you know how much shame you've brought to our clan? Granny Zhao was about to chase Feng Lu away, but she frowned when she heard those words. Uncle Chiu, Qiuling, and Chaoga were all there, and the beautiful lady was doing some needlework in the yard as well. It had been so peaceful and quiet in Fallen Star Yard before Feng Lu disrupted the atmosphere. Feng Lu stared at Feng Wu and smirked. What? After doing such a humiliating thing, are you going to leave just like that? There were a lot of people in Fallen Star Yard, and everyone went out and glared at Feng Lu. The short-tempered Chaoga rushed over to Feng Lu and picked her up by the collar. What was that? Do you want to get your ass kicked? Feng Lu smirked. Get my ass kicked? Ha ha ha, why don't you ask Feng Wu what she did? Does she have no shame at all? Chapter 1450, Untitled. Chapter 1450, Untitled. Chaoga raised a fist, but Feng Wu shook her head. What did I do? What do you mean? Feng Wu decided to stop ignoring Feng Lu. She walked up to her and gestured at Chaoga to put her down. Once released, Feng Lu started mocking Feng Wu again. What did you do? Feng Wu, the entire capital city has heard of it. Stop pretending. Feng Wu said calmly, speak or go away. Seeing her elaborate speech received with nonchalance, Feng Lu was furious. She smirked. You can quit pretending already. You're just a despicable maid now. How dare you act pretentiously in front of me? A despicable maid? Granny Zhao and the others were all surprised. What was that supposed to mean? Feng Lu snorted. You don't know? Feng Wu has been turned into His Royal Highness's personal maid. Personal, heh. Chaoga paled and grabbed Feng Wu by the arm. Xiao Wu, is that true? Feng Wu was already mad because of what Jun Linyuan had done, and hearing Feng Lu's slander, she almost had flames coming out of her eyes. She stared at Feng Lu with a cold look in her eyes and didn't say a word. Thinking that Feng Wu was intimidated, Feng Lu rejoiced, and her tone was even more sarcastic. Of course it's true. So many people in the Immortal Flower Grove heard it. The Crown Prince only said it in passing, but Feng Wu couldn't wait to say yes. Do you know what people outside are saying now? When I went to the Dugu family today, Feng Lu spoke in a serious tone, they asked me about it and wondered why a daughter of the Feng clan would want to become a bedwarming maid. Do you know how embarrassed I was when Aunt Dugu asked me that? I was so humiliated. Feng Wu, can you think about other people when you do something like this in the future? Fine, we all know you're in love with His Royal Highness and can't wait to get into his bed, but please don't just think about yourself the next time you're infatuated. I'm your cousin, and your humiliation becomes mine. If your reputation is ruined, so is mine. I can't believe this. If the Dugu family calls off the engagement, it'll be all your fault. Feng Lu had so many grudges against Feng Wu. Now that she finally had a chance, she would make sure to let it all out. Since she was deliberately trying to make a scene, instead of trying to control the damage, she yelled very loudly. Soon, more people had gathered around. Not only the members of Fallen Star Yard, even Feng Yanfeng and Lady Wang showed up. Feng Lu was even more pleased when she saw the crowd. She stared at Feng Wu and said sarcastically, Feng Wu, you're a shame to our clan. If you still have the least bit of shame, you should cut ties with the Feng clan. What's wrong? Feng Yanfeng frowned. Father. Feng Lu walked up to her parents as soon as she saw them and told them all about Feng Wu's job as Jun Linyuan's personal maid. She also stressed that Feng Wu was there to warm his bed. Warm his bed? Lady Wang looked astonished, and she stared at Feng Lu in disbelief. You can't make up stories like that. I'm not. All the people in the Immortal Flower Grove heard it. I'm not making up any stories. Feng Wu, tell us, did you or did you not agree to become the Crown Prince's personal maid? Chapter 1451, Is it true? Chapter 1451, Is it true? Instantly, all eyes were on Feng Wu. As Feng Lu's mother, Lady Wang certainly knew what Feng Lu meant. Feng Lu had suffered so much defeat at Feng Wu's hands. Now that she finally had the upper hand, Lady Wang had to back her up. Hence, Lady Wang faked an astonished face and smacked Feng Lu on the head. "Watch your language. That's your sister." Feng Lu smirked. "If she really thinks of herself as my sister, she should leave this clan. Otherwise, she'll only bring us shame." Lady Wang gritted her teeth and cast a stern look at Feng Lu. "How can you say such things about Feng Wu? Your sister isn't like that." As she spoke, she smiled at Feng Wu. "Xiao Wu, do tell us. Xiao Lu wasn't telling the truth, was she? Surely you wouldn't bring such shame to our family like that." What a question! One could tell how much she hated Feng Wu. Feng Wu didn't know how to describe her feelings right now. Had it not been for the mission, she would never have become Jun Linyuan's maid. Despite her frustration, she kept her face unperturbed. She then glanced at Lady Wang and said indifferently, "Jun Linyuan's maid? That's me." "What?" Lady Wang stared at Feng Wu with unblinking eyes. "What did you say? You're really warming his bed now?" Feng Wu smirked. "My lady, what's that look on your face? Do you think Feng Lu can get this job even if she wants it?" "Wow." Lady Wang sucked in her breath. You, Lady Wang, didn't expect to hear such a bold claim. "Aren't you ashamed?" Lady Wang went scarlet red in the face. Feng Wu smirked. "Ashamed? Other people can't get this opportunity even if they beg for it. Shouldn't I be honored? What's shameful about it?" "You," Lady Wang was so furious that she pointed a shaking finger at Feng Wu. Feng Lu stared at Feng Wu in astonishment as well. She had tried to attack Feng Wu with that piece of news, but Feng Wu didn't care at all. Not only that, she was actually proud of it. Feng Lu didn't know what to say. She felt as if she had thrown a punch with all her strength, only for her fist to hit cotton. The beautiful lady took Feng Wu's hand and looked very concerned. It broke one's heart to see her like that. You're shameless." Lady Wang pointed at Feng Wu's nose. However, Feng Yanfeng smacked her hand away. Ahem! Crossing his hands behind his back, Feng Yanfeng looked at Feng Wu with an expressionless face. He suddenly cleared his throat and gestured at Feng Wu to walk to the side with him. He stared at Feng Wu once they were alone. Feng Wu frowned. "Uncle, if there's nothing else, I'm going back inside." "Stop!" Feng Yanfeng stopped her. Feng Wu looked over her shoulder. Feng Yanfeng probably felt that it was an embarrassing question for him to ask as well, but he couldn't resist the possible gains. In the end, he cleared his throat and asked, "Is Feng Lu telling the truth?" Feng Wu looked at him in bewilderment. It only made Feng Yanfeng even more embarrassed, but he still snorted and asked, "Is it true, the thing between you and His Royal Highness?" Feng Wu said casually, "If by the thing you mean me becoming his personal maid." Chapter 1452, Untitled. Chapter 1452, Untitled. Feng Yanfeng looked Feng Wu up and down, and had to admit in the end that Feng Wu was a lot prettier than Feng Lu. No wonder even His Royal Highness was. Ahem, Feng Yanfeng cleared his throat. "Actually, it's not a bad thing." Feng Wu only gave him an indifferent glance, because she already knew what her uncle was getting at. Indeed, the next thing Feng Yanfeng said was, "Since His Royal Highness is into you now, you should take the chance to make him care for you." Feng Wu looked at him with expressionless eyes. Feng Yanfeng thought that Feng Wu was going to listen to him, so he said patiently, "You have to know how prestigious His Royal Highness is. He's the Crown Prince. You know how many girls are around him all the time. Yes, that's right. You're pretty, and His Royal Highness likes you, but can you be sure that His Royal Highness will always like you?" Feng Wu frowned when she heard that. Feng Yanfeng couldn't sense her annoyance at all, and went on trying to persuade her. "Xiao Wu, you have to listen to me. This is a chance you can't miss. Feng Wu. Feng Wu stared at Feng Yanfeng. Feng Yanfeng looked around, leaned closer to Feng Wu, and whispered, Xiao Wu, while you still have the chance, you have to. Feng Wu frowned. What did you say? Feng Yanfeng said, You have to get pregnant with the crown prince's baby. Feng Wu looked at Feng Yanfeng and found him a complete idiot. How could this man be a senior member of her own family? Feng Yanfeng stared at Feng Wu and stressed each word. The crown prince doesn't have any children now. If you give him a son, do you know what will happen? He'll dote on you, and you'll become the royal family's favorite. The Feng clan will rise because of you. Little Feng Wu, the entire Feng clan is counting on you. Even if you don't want it yourself, you have to do it for the clan. Do you understand? In the end, Feng Yanfeng was so excited that he was shaking Feng Wu by her shoulders. Feng Wu gave him a "you idiot" look. Seeing how unperturbed Feng Wu was, Feng Yanfeng gradually became disappointed. After a final glance at Feng Yanfeng, Feng Wu turned to leave. Feng Yanfeng's face darkened. Feng Wu. Feng Wu didn't even look back. She only said, Moron. Moron? Feng Yanfeng was astonished. He was the minister of the Ministry of Official Personnel, the head of the Feng clan, and Feng Wu's uncle. But she had just called him a moron. Hey, you stupid! But before he could go on, Feng Wu turned her head and sneered at him. Uncle, are you urging me to? Ahem. Feng Yanfeng coughed loudly to stop Feng Wu from telling other people. After all, as her uncle, he would be ridiculed if other people learned that he had urged his niece to sleep with a man, even if that man was Jun Linyuan. Although Feng Wu didn't finish the sentence, they all knew what she meant. Fearing that Feng Wu might expose her father, Feng Lu immediately tried to change the subject. Feng Wu, how can you be so proud when you haven't even been on a winter hunt yet? Feng Wu rolled her eyes at Feng Lu. Feng Lu smirked. You don't know what that is, do you? Chapter 1453, Untitled. Chapter 1453, Untitled. Feng Wu decided to let the idiot go on. Feng Lu gloated. Ha, of course you don't know what it is, because you're not qualified to go. You can't even be there. That's so funny. Chaoga was so mad that she wanted to hit Feng Lu. After her initial rage, Feng Wu had calmed down by now. She stopped Chaoga and let Feng Lu continue her performance. Are you done? Feng Wu looked at her. Feng Wu, you don't know what to say now, do you? Ha ha ha. Feng Lu laughed in satisfaction. Feng Wu then slammed the door shut. Feng Lu and the others were shut out. Hey! Feng Wu! Open the door! How dare you shut me out? Feng Lu kicked the door in frustration. However, the door wouldn't budge no matter how hard she kicked. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. Feng Lu turned around and almost jumped in fright, because an old woman was standing behind the crowd. And that old woman was staring at her with a very grim look in her eyes. Gee, Granny Gong! Feng Lu felt a chill run up her legs. Granny Gong was only a chief maid when she was in the Crown Prince's residence, but when she came outside, all the noble ladies of the empire had to address her politely and show her no less respect than they showed Lady Northern Feng. Therefore, when Granny Gong stood outside Fallen Star Yard with a grim face, Lady Wang tugged at Feng Lu's sleeve to shut her up. Feng Lu swallowed. Granny Gong! Granny Gong slowly walked up to Feng Lu, and suddenly smiled at her. Feng Lu was elated. Had she left a good impression on Granny Gong? Oh God, if she could earn Granny Gong's favor, her life would be so much easier. Feng Lu was thrilled, but there was a crisp sound, and Feng Lu was slapped in the face by none other than Granny Gong herself. Granny Gong, you! Feng Lu was astonished and felt wronged. The smile had vanished from Granny Gong's face, and her eyes were colder than ice. She stared at Feng Lu with her sharp gaze. Do you want to go on the winter hunt very much? Feng Lu said, Granny Gong, actually. You don't have to bother preparing for it now, Granny Gong said haughtily. Feng Lu stared at Granny Gong in surprise. Lady Wang realized what had happened, so she ran up to Granny Gong and tried to explain. Granny Gong, Lu didn't mean that. Actually, no one in the Feng clan except for Feng Wu is allowed to go hunting this time. After that announcement, Granny Gong gave them an arrogant glance and said, "Now, get out of here." Feng Lu still tried to explain, but Lady Wang tugged at her to stop her. After politely bidding Granny Gong farewell, Lady Wang took Feng Lu away. Feng Lu wouldn't accept it. "Mother, what are you worried about? She's just a nanny, and the chief maid of the Crown Prince's residence at most. Why does she think she can control our clan?" Smack! Lady Wang slapped Feng Lu before she could finish. "Shut up now, or you'll incriminate the entire Feng clan." Lady Wang had never been so mad at Feng Lu before. Chapter 1454, Untitled. Chapter 1454, Untitled. Feng Yanfeng had seen Granny Gong, but he thought he was too important to beg her, so he only gave her a nod and was ready to leave. But Granny Gong stopped him in a cold voice. "Master Feng," her voice wasn't loud, but there was something very majestic in it. She was only an elderly maid in the Crown Prince's residence, and was far more inferior to Feng Yanfeng, the minister of the Ministry of Official Personnel. But somehow, Feng Yanfeng felt intimidated by her. Granny Gong stared at Feng Yanfeng with her sharp gaze. "Master Feng, you're short-sighted." Feng Yanfeng was utterly baffled and looked at Granny Gong in confusion. Granny Gong snorted. To her, Feng Yanfeng was an idiot. If he had a little more faith in Feng Wu, he would be able to see the Crown Prince's feelings for her and wouldn't think Feng Wu was a mere bed-warming maid. Feng Yanfeng was about to ask, when Granny Gong cut him off in her indifferent voice. "Master Feng, think it over. If you're perceptive enough, you may be able to grab this great opportunity." That was all the hint Granny Gong would give him. Great opportunity? Feng Yanfeng was dumbfounded. Yes, a chance to make the Feng clan rise again. Granny Gong stared at the front gate of Fallen Star Yard. To make the Feng clan rise again? Feng Yanfeng was thrilled. Can the Feng clan become one of the 9 major clans again? Granny Gong glanced at Feng Yanfeng. The 9 major clans? You can rise higher than that. Feng Yanfeng was elated. He wanted to ask more questions, but Granny Gong was done reminding him. "Master Feng, think it through." After that, Granny Gong walked past Feng Yanfeng and went into Fallen Star Yard. She thought that Feng Yanfeng should understand, because she had made it so obvious. However, Feng Yanfeng was still dumbfounded after Granny Gong went inside. A great opportunity to make the Feng clan great again? What could it be? Could it be Feng Wu? But even if Feng Wu actually climbed into Jun Linyuan's bed and gave him a child, it wouldn't be enough to make the Feng clan rise. Could it be? Feng Yanfeng's eyes lit up. Could it be that Feng Wu's child would inherit Jun Linyuan's great talent, and the Feng clan would rise because of that genius baby? Yes, that had to be it. Feng Yanfeng successfully persuaded himself and got very excited. He couldn't wait to see Feng Wu pregnant and give birth. "Father, you've seen it. Feng Wu was so mean to me." Feng Lu took Feng Yanfeng's hand and complained. Feng Yanfeng had recognized Feng Wu's importance now, so he would never let Feng Lu hurt her. Keep this in mind. No more conflict with Feng Wu. Feng Yanfeng glared at Feng Lu. "Any conflicts in the future, and you'll be held responsible." "Father," Feng Lu was dumbfounded. She couldn't understand the sudden change in her father's attitude. What on earth happened? Feng Lu couldn't figure it out, but Feng Yanfeng wouldn't tell her either. Granny Gong walked into Fallen Star Yard and asked Feng Wu directly, "Miss Wu, do you need me to take care of Miss Feng Lu and the others for you?" "Take care of? How?" Feng Wu stared at Granny Gong in amazement. Granny Gong smiled at Feng Wu and said matter-of-factly, If Miss Wu wants, I can make her disappear. Feng Wu waved her hands. It's not that serious. Chapter 1455, Untitled. Chapter 1455, Untitled. Granny Gong said, "Then I'll make sure she can't participate in the winter hunt. If we don't teach her a lesson, His Royal Highness will punish me when he hears about it." Feng Wu's eyebrows knitted tightly when Jun Linyuan's name was mentioned, and she immediately cut Granny Gong off. "Please don't bring up that name anymore." Despite Feng Lu's insult and Feng Yanfeng's reprimand, Feng Wu hadn't really been affected. However, as soon as Granny Gong mentioned Jun Linyuan, Feng Wu flared up. Granny Gong wanted to say something, but hesitated. Her poor young master just didn't know how to express his feelings. "Miss Wu, His Royal Highness is just a little childish sometimes. In fact, he's very nice to you." "Very nice?" Feng Wu couldn't believe her ears. If Jun Linyuan was nice to her, then no one in this world could be considered mean. Granny Gong could guess from Feng Wu's silence what she was thinking, so she cleared her throat and said, "Ahem, actually, you're very special to His Royal Highness." Feng Wu glanced at Granny Gong in resignation. "Very special indeed, but I'd rather not be." Granny Gong said, "Miss Wu, actually." The Crown Prince really liked little Feng Wu, but he was just too proud, which was why he always behaved like a bully. She told Feng Wu that. Feng Wu rolled her eyes. "Granny Gong, do you believe that?" Granny Gong was speechless. She knew that so much misunderstanding had accumulated by now that no explanation would be enough, so she decided to leave it to her young master to solve the problem. She heaved a sigh and said, "Miss Wu, I think you should say goodbye to your family for the evening." Feng Wu kept her cold gaze on Granny Gong without saying a word. Despite her reluctance, Granny Gong still looked at Feng Wu and said solemnly, "Miss Wu, I think it's time you said goodbye." She made it very clear that Feng Wu had to go back with her tonight. Feng Wu pointed a trembling finger at Granny Gong and remained silent. Chaoga ran up to Feng Wu, put herself between the two people, and glared at Granny Gong. "You evil old woman! If you're trying to take Xiao Wu away, you'll have to kill me first." The others gathered around them as well. Chuling pleaded with her eyes. The beautiful lady was in tears. Granny Gong was speechless. She was only taking Feng Wu to the Crown Prince's residence. Why did they look like she was going to decapitate Feng Wu? Granny Gong ignored them all. She only stared at Feng Wu and said a name. "Feng Xiaoqi." Feng Wu frowned. "Granny Gong, are you threatening me now?" Granny Gong raised an eyebrow. "Miss Wu, I think you know the answer. His Royal Highness is the only one who can do that." Jun Linyuan. Feng Wu frowned. She had to admit that Jun Linyuan could actually do that. "Where's Xiaoqi?" Feng Wu asked Chaoga. Chaoga had been about to tell Feng Wu about it and she immediately said, "He left with some men who were supposed to be from the Imperial Guards. Xiao Wu, let's go get Xiaoqi now." So, it was indeed the Imperial Guards. Feng Wu stared at Granny Gong with a dangerous look in her eyes. Granny Gong remained unperturbed and spoke to Feng Wu in a low voice that only she could hear. The look on Feng Wu's face changed immediately. She stared at Granny Gong. "Are you threatening me now?" Chapter 1456, Untitled. Chapter 1456, Untitled. Granny Gong said, "You think too highly of me." Feng Wu snorted, walked out the door, and headed for the Fang Manor next door. Grand Secretary Fang was a highly capable man and Xiaoqi's teacher. Why would he let the Imperial Guards take Xiaoqi away? However, when she got there, Steward Fang told her that Grand Secretary Fang was out visiting a friend. Out visiting a friend? What a coincidence! Feng Wu frowned. Steward Fang bowed. Yes, the old master received an invitation from old Master Xing and immediately set out. Did he say when he'll be back? Feng Wu narrowed her eyes. Steward Fang shook his head with a wry smile. Feng Wu went back to Fallen Star Yard and only asked Granny Gong in an indifferent voice, "Does Jun Linyuan know old Master Xing?" Granny Gong replied in an unperturbed tone, "The old master taught His Royal Highness scriptures for a year before. He retired and went back to his hometown after His Royal Highness mastered everything." So, old Master Zheng's invitation must have been designed by Jun Linyuan to lure Grand Secretary Feng away. Damn you, Jun Linyuan! What lengths would he go to just to keep her around him? Feng Wu was speechless. Granny Gong looked at Feng Wu. "Miss Wu, stalling may not do young Master Qi any good." Of course Feng Wu knew that, but she still couldn't get over the fact that she was being threatened. "Xiao Wu, did the Crown Prince really hit you?" the beautiful lady asked between broken sobs. Feng Wu's eyes widened. "Did Jun Linyuan hit me? Where did that rumor come from?" The beautiful lady caressed Feng Wu's face with her soft hands and said nervously, "Good. There's no scar." Feng Wu was speechless. She took her mother's hand and frowned. "Mom, who told you that?" Since the beautiful lady remained at Fallen Star Yard all the time, rumors outside shouldn't be able to reach her, not to mention that it was utter nonsense. Chuling immediately complained, "It's all because of Miss Lu. When young Master Qi was taken away, she came here and spouted all sorts of rumors. We chased her off, but my lady obviously heard her." "That's right. They took Xiaoqi away. Xiao Wu, your brother was kidnapped." The beautiful lady sobbed and looked so perplexed. "Where did your brother go?" Feng Wu gave her mother a sympathetic look. She had no idea what the beautiful lady had gone through, but she had always lived in a confused state like this. To her, the world revolved around Feng Wu and Xiaoqi. Now that Xiaoqi was missing, she was bound to feel anxious. "Mom, don't worry. I'll bring Xiaoqi back." Feng Wu sighed inwardly. Granny Gong was right. It would be very unwise of her to argue with Jun Linyuan right now. Since she couldn't do that, she had to change her approach. She didn't like the idea, but what choice did she have? "Let's go." Feng Wu glanced at Granny Gong and walked out of the courtyard. Granny Gong heaved a sigh. She was genuinely worried that the young couple would fall out again. By now, because of Bishi, the Empress Dowager had noticed Feng Wu again. Granny Gong felt a headache coming on when she thought about that old lady. Feng Wu and Granny Gong left the Feng Manor and went back to the Crown Prince's residence. However, Chapter 1457, Untitled. Chapter 1457, Untitled. Soon, news leaked out of the Feng clan. It was said that Feng Wu ran back home after Jun Linyuan hit her, but Granny Gong came after her and took her back to the residence. Jun Linyuan was such a high-profile name. And Feng Wu drew a lot of attention. Everyone was so curious about their story that in less than 2 hours, the news spread to every corner of the imperial capital. Even the Empress Dowager heard it. What? Junjun beat Feng Wu up? The Empress Dowager didn't like Feng Wu in the first place. After what she heard from Bishi, she disliked Feng Wu even more. Therefore, she was secretly delighted when she heard the news. If that's the case, let her stay in the Crown Prince's residence to recover from her injuries. Eliminate her name from the list of participants for the winter hunt. The Empress Dowager didn't want to see Feng Wu's face. Lady Northern Feng was about to speak, but the old lady cast a stern look at her. "Don't say a word. Don't mention her name again in front of me. Otherwise, I won't like you any more." Lady Northern Feng was rendered speechless. What could she do about the willful old lady? All news got around eventually, not to mention a decree from the Empress Dowager herself. Therefore, before Feng Wu and Granny Gong got back to the Crown Prince's residence, the news of Feng Wu being scolded by the Empress Dowager and her name being removed from the list had already gotten around. It spread so fast that someone had to be behind it. And the two of them came back too late to hear the news until the following day. The winter hunt was a big deal for the royal family, but with so many servants around, things were quickly prepared and packed. Early next morning, Feng Wu had yet to wake up when she felt something cold on the tip of her nose. She opened her eyes to find the domineering crown prince sitting by her bed. Feng Wu smacked his hand away and glared at him. Jun Linyuan, what are you doing? Humph! The proud crown prince felt rather humiliated by her reaction. After what Feng said the night before, Jun Linyuan seemed to realize that what he had done to Feng Wu was wrong. Right now, he was here to mend things. But Feng Wu's rejection immediately set him off. Feng Wu had no idea that she had offended Jun Linyuan, and she glared at him. Even a crown prince shouldn't just walk into a girl's room. I have my own dignity. Jun Linyuan smirked and said the first thing that came into his mind. You're a bed-warming maid. What dignity do you have? Feng Wu almost exploded when she heard that. Her eyes went bloodshot red and she yelled, Jun Linyuan, what did you say? Outside, Feng really wanted to smack the crown prince on the head. He didn't know what else he could do. The crown prince was an incredibly smart man, and other people would willingly follow his lead. But when Feng Wu was involved, he simply stopped thinking. What was wrong with him? Seeing that the young couple was going to start a row again, Feng immediately intervened. Your Royal Highness, you still need to sign a lot of memorials to the throne. Hearing that, Jun Linyuan threw an angry glance at Feng Wu. You're impossible. Reflect on yourself. He stormed off after that. Chapter 1458, Untitled. Chapter 1458, Untitled. Seeing Jun Linyuan leave, Feng Wu was so frustrated, but she didn't know where to vent. She realized that she was such a wuss around Jun Linyuan. Feng tried to explain to Feng Wu, actually, His Royal Highness was here to piss me off, is it? Feng Wu stared at Feng. Feng was speechless. What are you still doing there? Jun Linyuan yelled outside. Feng was speechless. With their temperaments, he wondered when the two of them would reconcile. Feng himself almost felt like crying. With no other choice, he could only give Feng Wu a long look. Miss Feng, please get up. We're leaving for the winter hunt in an hour. After Feng left, the more Feng Wu thought about it, the more displeased she became. The winter hunt was the last thing she wanted to do right now. However, Jun Linyuan still had Xiaoqi, and she had agreed to be his maid for 18 days, so she had to go. Suppressing her frustration, Feng Wu struggled to her feet. Being as pretty as she was, she didn't need to do much. After quickly washing up and getting dressed, she pushed the door open. So, Miss Feng is awake. Feng Wu pushed the door open to see a pretty girl leaning against the wall and looking at her in a triumphant way. This was. Feng Wu frowned. Because she recognized the person. It was none other than Bishi, the girl who had confronted her before. Feng Wu wasn't in the mood to talk, so she gave her a nod and was going to walk past her. However, little maid, where are you going? Bishi uncrossed her arms and said to Feng Wu with a smile. Her tone was quite provoking. Moreover, who was she to call her a maid? Who did she think she was? Feng Wu was already grumpy from having to get up, and with the row with Jun Linyuan, she was very angry when Bishi just showed up like this. So, she wasn't going to play nice. To the winter hunt. Feng Wu stared at Bishi. The winter hunt? Ah, are you saying you're going? Bishi gave her an "you're insane" look. Feng Wu ignored her and continued walking. You haven't heard? Bishi shouted behind Feng Wu. She didn't try to keep her voice down, so she had already caused a scene. Slowly, people began to gather. Zhenxia and a few young maids were standing a short distance away. Zhenxia was on Zhua Qingluan's payroll, so she was naturally hostile toward Feng Wu. She was thrilled to see Bishi criticizing Feng Wu. Seeing that Feng Wu was leaving, Bishi said in a sarcastic voice, Don't you know? You're not qualified to go to this year's winter hunt. What? Feng Wu frowned and stared at Bishi. Bishi looked like she had just seen an idiot. You seem surprised. But didn't you know? Only 4 maids can go, and you're new here. Why would you think you get to go? Feng Wu was a little baffled. Crossing her hands behind her back, Bishi raised her chin and gloated. Moreover, the Empress Dowager gave a decree. You, Feng Wu, have been disqualified from going. Disqualified? Feng Wu frowned. Are you sure? Seeing the way Feng Wu frowned, Bishi thought that Feng Wu was unhappy, which pleased her immensely. It's an order from the Empress Dowager, so of course it's true. Feng Wu, don't tell me you just presumed you could go. How do you feel now? I bet you're so mad. Ha ha ha. Chapter 1459 Royal Progress 1. Chapter 1459 Royal Progress 1. Feng Wu was speechless. She had never wanted to go to the event in the first place. Hearing this good news, she felt like throwing a party to celebrate. Are you sure I'm not qualified to go? Feng Wu looked at Bishi with her brooding eyes. Bishi snorted. Feng Wu, I see that you really want to go hunting. Too bad, you're not allowed to. Ha ha. The idea of Feng Wu not being able to go made Bishi feel utterly satisfied. But Feng Wu, as soon as she heard that she wasn't qualified, she was over the moon. Without another word, she turned around and headed back. She moved so fast that the others didn't have time to react. When Bishi realized what had happened, Feng Wu was already several hundred meters away. Dumbfounded, Bishi watched as Feng Wu walked away. She then turned to Zhenxia with a confused look on her face. She left just like that? Bishi stared at Zhenxia and mumbled. Zhenxia was too smart to get involved in the conflict between Bishi and Feng Wu, so she gave Bishi a little bow and left with her young maids. Bishi was speechless. By then, the crown prince had already gotten into his carriage. However, he was so angry at the moment that no one dared to get any closer. Even Feng couldn't start a normal conversation with him. Why aren't we moving? The crown prince asked impatiently. That girl is so grumpy. I can't even make fun of her now. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Your Royal Highness, some people are still not here yet, especially Feng. However, the crown prince cut him off with a wave of his hand. If they're not here yet, they're not going. He was so angry that he didn't understand what Feng was saying. Feng was speechless, for he knew that his young master didn't hear him clearly, so he raised his voice and said, Your Royal Highness, Miss Feng Wu hasn't arrived yet. Something clicked in Jun Linyuan's head. No one could disturb him like that, not even the Emperor or the Empress Dowager. However, whenever Feng Wu's name popped up, it meant something special. However, he still cared about his pride more. How dare she not show up? Good. That's interesting. So interesting. Jun Linyuan smirked. Let her stay behind then. Let's go. After that, Jun Linyuan gave a wave, and they were on their way. Bishi was one of the maids who was allowed to tag along. She wasn't on the list at first, but since she worked for the Empress Dowager, all it took was a word from the old lady, and she was given permission. She was a little fidgety after confronting Feng Wu today, fearing that the crown prince would punish her later. However, Bishi was thrilled when she heard what Jun Linyuan said. Feng Wu, there I was, thinking you mean something to His Royal Highness, but as it turns out, you're nothing special. Bishi wasn't worried anymore. The winter hunt always took place in the Selna grassland. That grassland was where the Selna tribe lived. They were one of the fiercer tribes in the empire, and known as the tribe on horseback. The tribesmen were known for their towering heights and sturdiness. They were born with great strength and were innately amazing soldiers. Chapter 1460 Royal Progress 2. Chapter 1460 Royal Progress 2. Therefore, even Emperor Wu, the ruler of the continent, had to be on friendly terms with the tribe. The winter hunt was when Emperor Wu paid a friendly visit to the chief of the tribe, and more went on behind the scenes than any ordinary person could comprehend. That was why Emperor Wu would have a large entourage every single time. At Dinwu Gate, Emperor Wu brought more than 20 officials with him this time, all of whom were his closest confidants. And they all came with their own families as well, who had carriage after carriage of luggage. Right now, the square outside Dinwu Gate was packed. Luckily, the families all had their allotted spots, so it wasn't very messy. There was a hubbub of voices as soon as Emperor Wu showed up. "Your Majesty!" Emperor Wu's steward smiled wryly and spoke in a low voice when the Emperor was about to give the order to set out. "His Royal Highness isn't here yet." "What?" Emperor Wu's face immediately darkened. For this trip, he had not only brought Empress Dugu, but quite a few concubines as well. However, Empress Dugu was the only one sharing a carriage with the Emperor. Hearing the steward's words, Empress Dugu thought that her chance had arrived, so she slowly said, "His Royal Highness is really arrogant. Your Majesty has to wait for him now." Emperor Wu was already unhappy, and Empress Dugu's deliberate words only aggravated the situation. He was visibly in a bad mood. The chief steward smiled bitterly inwardly. Her Majesty is still so selfish. She's all about making her own son the crown prince instead. However, the chief steward was completely on Jun Linyuan's side, even if the young man had never been particularly nice to him. Jun Linyuan is getting bolder and bolder. Emperor Wu smacked the table. "Your Majesty, we calculated the best time to set out. If we're delayed because of His Royal Highness, it won't be a good sign. What are we going to do?" Empress Dugu feigned a worried tone. Emperor Wu snorted. "If he doesn't want to come, then don't. Tell everyone we're leaving now." Emperor Wu had 2 stewards with him. The chief steward, Zhao Rihai, was 100% Jun Linyuan's supporter. The other steward was by the eunuch, who had served Emperor Wu when the latter had still been the crown prince. After all these years, they had quite a close relationship. However, Bai was on Empress Dugu's side, so he didn't like Jun Linyuan. The chief steward and Bai left the imperial carriage, and Bai looked pleased. He glanced at the chief steward and smirked. "How can His Royal Highness make His Majesty wait? That's too arrogant." The chief steward almost rolled his eyes. "I'm sure His Royal Highness has his own reasons." Bai asked, "Does he? I wonder who is important enough to make His Majesty wait." His voice might be low, but Emperor Wu heard everything. "That's unacceptable." Emperor Wu was very serious about his dignity, and he wouldn't be challenged. Now that Bai had said that, his impression of Jun Linyuan immediately worsened. What was Jun Linyuan doing now? Halfway to the square, the crown prince couldn't stand it anymore. He had been thinking about Feng Wu the entire time. Chapter 1461 Royal Progress 3 Chapter 1461 Royal Progress 3 In the end, Jun Linyuan felt a throbbing pain in his head. What was the point of going if little Feng Wu didn't go? Jun Linyuan suddenly realized a frightening fact. Before he knew it, Feng Wu had become so important to him. Without Feng Wu, everything was so dull. He sat there dazed for a very long time when he realized that shocking fact. When he returned to himself, "Feng!" he told the carriage to stop. Phew! Feng sighed in relief. He knew it. The two of them couldn't stay mad at each other for long, but he had thought that Feng Wu would be the first to give in. As it turned out, the first to surrender was obviously the one who was more in love. "I left something behind at the house. Go fetch it for me," Jun Linyuan told Feng. Feng cleared his throat. "Left something behind? My dear crown prince, don't you have a storage ring, where you store all the important files?" That excuse was simply too lame and stupid. However, Feng wasn't going to expose his young master, so he put on his most innocent smile and asked, "Your Royal Highness, what did you leave behind?" June Linyuan asked. You don't know? Feng played dumb. I don't. Your Royal Highness, please enlighten me. June Linyuan's carriage was in the center and drew the most attention. Therefore, when they saw June Linyuan in the carriage, staring at Feng outside in vexation, they all knew that something was going on. Turn back! June Linyuan threw a dirty look at Feng and told everyone to turn around. Since he was the crown prince, he was traveling with the whole shebang. It was practically an army. Everyone was dumbfounded. Go back! Everyone looked at one another in bewilderment, because they didn't know why they had to turn around. Hadn't Feng said it earlier? Their delay would slow down the entire team. What on earth happened? They exchanged confused looks. June Linyuan didn't let anyone question him. Looking at his dark face, no one dared to ask. Your Royal Highness, time is running out. If we go back now, His Majesty may. Granny Gong tried to warn June Linyuan, but he wouldn't be June Linyuan if he listened. He only threw Granny Gong a resentful and displeased look. Resentful and displeased? Granny Gong felt perplexed. She could understand if His Royal Highness was unhappy, but why the resentment? Feng nudged her with his elbow and mouthed Feng Wu's name. Granny Gong was usually a smart person, but that didn't mean that was always the case. Like right now, she didn't know how Feng Wu had anything to do with this. Miss Wu still isn't here. Seeing that June Linyuan was getting more and more furious, and that the air felt like it was going to freeze, Feng lowered his voice and enlightened Granny Gong when June Linyuan wasn't looking. Granny Gong's eyes widened. Miss Wu isn't here? Why, she's on the entourage list. Chapter 1462, Why is His Royal Highness late? 1. Chapter 1462, Why is His Royal Highness late? 1. Feng said grumpily, Feng Wu really isn't here. Everyone immediately started talking and arguing. So, His Royal Highness really wants to go back because Feng Wu isn't here. So, His Royal Highness really cares about Feng Wu, doesn't he? So, His Royal Highness. Granny Gong was dumbfounded. Miss Wu isn't in the entourage? How can that be? Miss Wu should be here. Granny Gong searched everywhere, but when she couldn't find Feng Wu, she panicked. She had come up with the name list for the Crown Prince's residence, so she knew better than anyone else where Feng Wu should be. Her Majesty the Empress Dowager specifically gave the order that Feng Wu's name shouldn't be on the list, someone said in a low voice. The Empress Dowager's order. Immediately, all eyes were on Bishi. Bishi was from the palace, and she had been out last night. Knowing that she couldn't pretend that she was innocent, Bishi stepped out and spoke in a low voice. Her Majesty did summon me last night, and she asked me about Feng Wu. But I'm not to be blamed. Her Majesty doesn't like Feng Wu to begin with. Granny Gong's face darkened. So, it was indeed because of Bishi. Are you an idiot? Infuriated, Granny Gong smacked Bishi on the forehead. Bishi was dumbfounded. Even those around her stared at Granny Gong in disbelief. Bishi had been sent here by the Empress Dowager, who had explicitly told everyone that Bishi was going to be the Crown Prince's concubine. But now Granny Gong had just hit her in front of so many people. Bishi was dumbfounded and stared at Granny Gong in disbelief. You hit me? You're just an old maid. How dare you hit me? Granny Gong took a deep breath. It was really tiresome to deal with such a stupid woman. Bishi had no idea what Granny Gong was thinking and went on yelling at her. You hit me because of Feng Wu? She's a nobody. How dare you hit me because of her? That's right. Feng Wu wanted to come this morning, but I stopped her. I laughed at her and told her she wasn't qualified. So what? What can you possibly do to me? Bishi raised her chin and looked very smug. She believed that she was going to be an imperial concubine one day. However, before she could go on, a fair, slender and strong hand wrapped itself around her thin, porcelain neck. Oh no! Bishi felt suffocated and couldn't breathe. She was then lifted up until her feet left the ground. Your Royal Highness! Feng had looked away for a moment, and the next thing he knew, Jun Linyuan had picked Bishi up by the neck. Your Royal Highness, don't! Granny Gong said hastily. Bishi had such a special status that she couldn't be handled roughly. Otherwise, Granny Gong wouldn't have put up with her for so long. However, crack, they heard the crisp sound of bones breaking. Everyone's eyes widened. They watched as Jun Linyuan snapped Bishi's thin, white neck. Just like that, the pretty girl was dead. Chapter 1463 Why is His Royal Highness late? 2. Chapter 1463 Why is His Royal Highness late? 2. All around them, there was only silence. No one dared to breathe loudly or make a sound. That was so terrifying. Chills ran up their legs and spines, and they felt cold to the bone. They had always known that the Crown Prince was a heartless man who could kill easily. But recently, it had been a while since the servants at the residence saw the Crown Prince lose his temper. They even thought that they were beginning to see something human in him. So, many people involuntarily thought that the Crown Prince had become more approachable. As it turned out, he was still that heartless Crown Prince. Your Royal Highness! Immediately, everyone dropped to their knees, lowered their heads, and didn't dare to meet Jun Linyuan's eyes. The Crown Prince looked around with his cold, murderous eyes. His eyes seemed to see through everything. The crowd shook from head to toe. They didn't dare meet his gaze and had to control their breathing so that they wouldn't make a sound. Let's go! Jun Linyuan snorted, tossed Bishi aside, and marched off. The others felt chilled to the bone. The Crown Prince's residence. Feng Wu had slept in that morning and was enjoying the moment. She was having a sweet dream when she felt a cold, intense gaze on her. The person never looked away. Feng Wu was so sensitive that she couldn't ignore such an intense gaze. Involuntarily, she opened her eyes. Jun Linyuan? Feng Wu rubbed her sleepy eyes and yawned. Jun Linyuan gave her a half-smile. Crossing his arms, Jun Linyuan strolled over to the bed and stopped in front of Feng Wu. You're awake. The Crown Prince pinched Feng Wu's plump cheeks with his slender fingers. Jun Linyuan's fingers were as cold as ever, and his touch immediately woke Feng Wu up. She shuddered and smacked his hands away. Didn't you go to the winter hunt? Why are you back? Feng Wu was surprised. The Crown Prince smirked. To look for you. To look for me? Feng Wu pointed a finger at herself. Haven't you heard? Her Majesty the Empress Dowager specifically gave the order that I'm not allowed to go. Jun Linyuan gave her an indifferent glance. Why do I feel that you look very happy? I'm not. Feng Wu wasn't a fool, so of course she wasn't going to admit it. She immediately said, I'm not qualified to go? I'm so sad. I'm such a pitiful girl. Jun Linyuan stared at Feng Wu like he was looking at an idiot. Under his gaze, Feng Wu couldn't keep pretending, so she cleared her throat to give herself a way out. Hey Jun Linyuan, are you also not going to the winter hunt? Feng Wu really didn't want to go. The wind was the harshest on the Sinal grassland during this season, and it wouldn't be a comfortable journey. But because of that, the beasts which came out at this time were fierce magical beasts, making it the perfect season for a hunt. Let's go. Jun Linyuan wrapped his right hand around Feng Wu's little hand and dragged her toward the door. Hey, where are you taking me? Feng Wu suddenly had a bad feeling. The winter hunt. The Crown Prince's answer was very succinct. Feng Wu said, Hey, I'm not going. The Crown Prince grunted. Didn't you just call yourself a sad, pitiful girl? Chapter 1464 Why is His Royal Highness late? 3. Chapter 1464 Why is His Royal Highness late? 3. Feng Wu buried her face in her hands. But I'm not qualified to go. Her Majesty the Empress Dowager gave the order to exclude me from the entourage. The Crown Prince looked at Feng Wu as if she was an idiot. Are you stupid? Feng Wu was dumbfounded. The Crown Prince said, That order is meaningless to me. Feng Wu said, Ahem, that's an imperial decree. Jun Linyuan said, To other people. He was always the one who would be treated differently. Feng Wu shook her head. What more could she say? Most of the Crown Prince's entourage had left for Dinwu Gate, led by Granny Gong. When they arrived, the others were ready to set off. The chief steward had been keeping an eye on the surroundings, and was finally relieved when he saw the people of the Crown Prince's residence. His Royal Highness is finally here. The chief steward heaved a sigh of relief. Bai frowned. He hadn't expected Jun Linyuan to arrive in time, and had thought that he could use the opportunity to trash the Crown Prince. What a waste of an opportunity! Bai was disappointed. I see that His Royal Highness decided to show up at the last minute, Bai said sarcastically. The chief steward glanced at Bai. Master Bai, I advise you not to step out of line. His Royal Highness's position isn't easily shaken. Bai snorted and wouldn't comment. A stepmother could turn a real father into a stepfather as well. His Majesty doted on Empress Dugu right now, and of course, he loved their son, the second prince. Was the Crown Prince's position that stable? Bai didn't think so. The chief steward was about to tell Emperor Wu that the Crown Prince was here, when Granny Gong gave him a wry smile. She then told him that the Crown Prince wasn't in the carriage. What? The chief steward panicked. How can His Royal Highness not be here? The chief steward stared at Granny Gong in disbelief. Granny Gong, this isn't the time to make jokes like that. Bai gave Granny Gong a strange look as well. Granny Gong smiled bitterly. She knew what the situation was like right now, but what could she do about the willful prince? Just then, they heard Emperor Wu's voice from the carriage nearby. What's with the noise? Bai immediately seized the opportunity to step forward and answer loudly, Your Majesty, the Crown Prince's entourage is here. The chief steward and Granny Gong frowned as they stared at Bai. Bai had put it in such an ambiguous way that he had deliberately made the Emperor think that the Crown Prince had arrived. Emperor Wu was still mad, and he smirked when he heard that. Tell that unruly son of mine to get over here. Granny Gong knew that she couldn't let things go on like this, so she stepped forward, bowed to the imperial carriage, and replied, Your Majesty, His Royal Highness hasn't arrived yet. What? Empress Dugu's instigation earlier already made Emperor Wu very displeased with Jun Linyuan's arrogance, and he flared up when he heard Granny Gong's answer. Smack! Emperor Wu smacked his chair and an armrest fell off. Seeing this, Empress Dugu immediately held his arm and said softly, Your Majesty, please don't be angry. Do calm down. Rage is bad for you, and your health is the most important thing. Chapter 1465, Untitled. Chapter 1465, Untitled. Holding Empress Dugu's hand, Emperor Wu said in a solemn voice, Even you are concerned about my health, but that defiant son of mine. He wants to see me die from frustration, so that he can take the throne. That last bit was a very serious accusation. Empress Dugu secretly rejoiced, but she feigned a terrified voice and said, Your Majesty, please don't be mad. I'm sure that's not the Crown Prince's intention. The more she tried to appease Emperor Wu, the angrier he became. Since he doesn't want to go, then don't. Emperor Wu waved his hand in vexation. Seeing that things were getting out of hand, Granny Gong ran to the Empress Dowager for help. The old lady was already in her carriage and couldn't be bothered to move around. However, she sat up in astonishment when she heard the news. Is the Crown Prince still not here? The old lady's face darkened. All the officials were waiting outside Dinwu Gate, and they had all heard Emperor Wu's opinion of his son, which was very bad for the teenager. Granny Gong nodded without hesitation. That shouldn't be the case. The Empress Dowager frowned and murmured, Junjun is the type of person who always keeps his promises. He won't arrive early, but he won't be late either. There has to be a reason for it. After that, she suddenly looked up and stared at Granny Gong. Speak. What happened in the Crown Prince's residence? Granny Gong said, Well, are you not going to tell me? Fine. The Empress Dowager stared at Granny Gong and said, Bring Bishi here. Bishi. Granny Gong felt like fainting. Bishi couldn't come, because Jun Linyuan had killed her. What? Seeing that Granny Gong wasn't moving, the Empress Dowager looked displeased. Miss Bishi. After some hesitation, Granny Gong finally told the old lady, Miss Bishi is dead. What? The Empress Dowager was astonished. She stared at Granny Gong in disbelief. How? Did someone kill her? Granny Gong said calmly, It was His Royal Highness. The furious Empress Dowager immediately calmed down. Was it Junjun? Yes, Your Majesty. Granny Gong nodded. All anger disappeared from the old lady's face, and she waved her hand. I'm sure Junjun had his reasons. So be it. It's no big deal. Granny Gong was speechless. She was already used to the Empress Dowager's behavior, so she wasn't surprised by her reaction. The others around the old lady were even more used to it, and no one looked the least bit disturbed. So, are you here because something happened to the Crown Prince? The Empress Dowager looked at Granny Gong. Granny Gong immediately said, His Royal Highness is late and hasn't arrived yet, so His Majesty is displeased. That's it? I thought it was something much bigger. Come, let's have a look. With Granny Lan at her elbow, the Empress Dowager left her carriage and headed for Emperor Wu's. Meanwhile, Emperor Wu was throwing a tantrum at Jun Linyuan's late arrival. He smacked the table and bellowed, If that defiant son doesn't want to go, disqualify him. We're leaving now. Empress Dogu secretly rejoiced. It seemed that the Crown Prince had fallen out of favor. Seeing how furious the Emperor was, all the officials shivered in fear and didn't dare to move. Your Majesty! A cold voice rang out at that moment. Chapter 1466, Untitled. Chapter 1466, Untitled. Emperor Wu was wondering who was bold enough to intrude on him, when he saw that it was his mother. Mother, what are you doing here? Emperor Wu quickly moved closer to hold her arm with an obsequious smile on his face. Being a filial son, Emperor Wu had always been very obedient toward his mother. The Empress Dowager glared at Emperor Wu. I hear that you're going to remove Junjun from the entourage. Emperor Wu cleared his throat. The Empress Dowager glared at him. It's true. You really are going to do that? Empress Dogu interjected. Your Majesty, that's only because His Royal Highness is so. Shut your mouth. The old lady was furious, and she glowered at Empress Dogu. I'm talking to my son. This isn't your place to speak. Empress Dogu was speechless. The Empress Dowager cast a stern look at Empress Dogu. You just can't wait to see the Emperor hate the Crown Prince so that your own son can take his place, can you? I'm telling you, in your dreams. Empress Dogu felt so embarrassed at being scolded like that. She let her eyes fill with tears as she said in a pitiful voice, Your Majesty, you've misunderstood me. I just don't want to see His Majesty wronged. Emperor Wu held her hand and was touched by his dear Zitong. The Empress Dowager glared at Empress Dogu. Just shut up. Emperor Wu said, Mother. The Empress Dowager lashed out at Emperor Wu. Can't you see by now what her plan is? Why is she crying? Have I wronged her? Junjun has no parents, he should be the one crying. Emperor Wu cleared his throat. Mother, I'm still around. When there's a stepmother, the real father will forget about his son. You're as bad as a stepfather now. Emperor Wu cleared his throat. Humph. The Empress Dowager snorted and sat down on the soft cushion. Emperor Wu said, "Mother." The Empress Dowager said, "Not another word. I'm going to wait here, and I'm not leaving before Junjun arrives." Emperor Wu didn't know what to say. Empress Dugu was speechless. She held Emperor Wu's hand in frustration, humiliated by the old lady's scolding. Emperor Wu could only hold her hand without being able to offer any comforting words. Around them, all the officials lowered their heads in silence. The chief steward and Bai didn't say a word either. They all knew perfectly well that as long as the Empress Dowager was around, no one would threaten Jun Linyuan's position. While the situation was under control, over on the other end in the Crown Prince's residence. "Come with me." Jun Linyuan took Feng Wu's hand. Feng Wu frowned. "I really don't want to go." Jun Linyuan looked back at Feng Wu. "Are you sure?" Feng Wu nodded repeatedly. "Yes, very." Jun Linyuan snorted. "Who gave you the right to stay here?" Feng Wu was dumbfounded. Jun Linyuan snorted. "You go where I go. Got it?" Feng Wu was speechless. Before Feng Wu realized what was going on, Jun Linyuan pulled her away, and she had to stumble after him. Feng Wu tired to shake his hand off, but the Crown Prince only held her hand tighter. On their way from the Crown Prince's residence to Dingwu Gate. Chapter 1467 Untitled. Chapter 1467 Untitled. A lot of people were positioned along the road just to report on Jun Linyuan's whereabout. There. His Royal Highness has left his residence. His Royal Highness has passed Anding Street. His Royal Highness has crossed Anha Bridge. His Royal Highness has. Soon, the news reached Dingwu Gate. Meanwhile, everyone was silent and no one made a sound. Those who were qualified to come were anything but fools, and they all realized how tense the situation was. "All hail His Royal Highness!" A high-pitched voice at the gate announced Jun Linyuan's arrival. Despite the eunuch's shrill voice, the others felt very relieved to hear it. They could finally breathe normally again. Hearing that, the Empress Dowager rose to her feet and threw a dirty look at Emperor Wu. "I told you that Junjun would be here. Wasn't I right?" After that, she headed out. Empress Dugu's face turned livid. Outside. Junjun. The Empress Dowager was elated to see Jun Linyuan. She was about to walk up to him with Granny Lan when she looked up and saw Jun Linyuan holding Feng Wu's hand. Immediately, the Empress Dowager's face turned livid. "You?" The Empress Dowager glared at Feng Wu with cold eyes. Feng Wu used all her might to throw off Jun Linyuan's hand. However, that didn't appease the Empress Dowager. The look in her eyes only turned even more fierce. Taking Jun Linyuan's hand, she said, "Junjun, you're finally here. Everyone's waiting for you. What took you so long?" Jun Linyuan gave Feng Wu an indifferent glance. Feng Wu looked at him angrily and wouldn't let him blame it on her. "Ahem." Jun Linyuan coughed into his fist and asked, "Can we go now?" "Yes, of course." "You lot, help the Crown Prince to his carriage." The Empress Dowager was used to taking care of Jun Linyuan like this, but it meant much more to the officials. Feng Wu was about to get into the carriage as well, when the Empress Dowager shot a warning glance at her. Feng Wu sighed inwardly. "Come to my carriage." The old lady threw a dirty look at Feng Wu and gave the order. Feng Wu was speechless. Granny Gong wanted to follow them, but her stomach lurched when she saw the look the Empress Dowager gave her. She gave Feng Wu a concerned look before she turned her searching look on Jun Linyuan. Seeing that Jun Linyuan wouldn't respond, Granny Gong could only heave a sigh and leave the young people to their own devices. After a delay of nearly 2 hours, the procession finally started moving. In the Empress Dowager's carriage, the old lady sat straight in her seat with a solemn look on her face. She kept her unblinking gaze on Feng Wu. Feng Wu lowered her head and stood silently in front of the Empress Dowager like a pitiful little girl. The air felt so heavy. Any other girl would have been frightened to tears by the atmosphere, but not Feng Wu. She was too strong to be affected. However, she had to look frightened. "Now you're nervous." The Empress Dowager was pleased when she saw how intimidated Feng Wu looked. Why was the Crown Prince late? She stared at Feng Wu. Chapter 1468, Untitled. Chapter 1468, Untitled. Feng Wu didn't know what to say, because she had no idea why Jun Linyuan was late. However, His Royal Highness has his own way of doing things, and as his maid, I know nothing about it. Feng Wu hesitated at calling herself a maid, but she was going to be Jun Linyuan's maid for the next 18 days, so she had to force herself to say it. The Empress Dowager snorted. I knew it. How can you possibly know what the Crown Prince is thinking? Feng Wu rolled her eyes inwardly. If you knew that, why bother asking in the first place? The Empress Dowager was visibly less displeased after that, but suddenly she seemed to recall something, and the look in her eyes turned very fierce. Feng Wu. She glared at Feng Wu. How dare you? She smacked the armrest. Any other girl would have been frightened to tears, but not Feng Wu. She was far tougher than the old lady could imagine. Your Majesty, please don't be angry. Feng Wu made to kneel down. Clean her hands, the Empress Dowager said angrily. Maids approached Feng Wu with punishment rulers in their hands and ferocious expressions. The look on Feng Wu's face changed a little. The Empress Dowager was surrounded by capable people, and two strong elderly maids pinned Feng Wu down and twisted her arms behind her back. Seeing this, Granny Lan was concerned, so when the Empress Dowager wasn't looking, she raised the curtain and shot Granny Gong a warning glance. Granny Gong had been waiting outside the carriage, and she immediately realized that Feng Wu was in trouble. That was bad. Knowing how Jun Linyuan felt for Feng Wu, Granny Gong could only imagine how chaotic things would get if the Empress Dowager ended up punishing Feng Wu. At that thought, Granny Gong immediately ran off to report to her young master. Clean her hands with the rulers. The Empress Dowager's face was livid, and her tone was very decisive. She believed that Feng Wu had seduced the Crown Prince. Otherwise, her Jun would never have arrived late. Outside the carriage, Emperor Wu had brought people of various clans with him this time. Northern Feng Mansion, the Zhuo family, the Feng clan, the Dugu family, and Mu Manor were all included. Of the royal family, the Empress Dowager, the Empress, concubine Oriole, the third and fifth princesses, and the third prince were coming along as well. They had yet to recover from the shocking scene of Jun Linyuan arriving with Feng Wu's hand in his. So, right now, they were all discussing it among themselves in their respective carriages. Lady Northern Feng wasn't happy about it, because she still didn't think that Jun Linyuan would be a good husband for Feng Wu. As for the Zhuo family, Mrs. Zhuo's eyes were opened so wide, and she wanted to throttle Feng Wu. Because of Dugu Yamo, Mrs. Dugu didn't hate Feng Wu any less than Mrs. Zhuo did. Lady Mu also disliked Feng Wu because of what happened to Mu Yaoyao. The Feng clan. Granny Gong had excluded the Feng clan from the list, but Empress Dugu had somehow managed to get their names added back. Therefore, Feng Lu, Feng Sang and Lady Wang were also here. There were other families and clans as well. Mrs. Zhuo and Mrs. Dugu were sitting in the same carriage at the moment. Mrs. Zhuo frowned and asked Mrs. Dugu, "Sister, did you see it?" Mrs. Dugu asked, "What?" Mrs. Zhuo said, "His Royal Highness and Feng Wu are quite familiar with each other." Mrs. Dugu smiled a little. "Sister, are you nervous?" "Well, Qingluan is the Crown Prince's wife-to-be, so your reaction is only to be expected." Chapter 1469, Untitled. Chapter 1469, Untitled. Holding Mrs. Dugu's hand, Mrs. Zhuo smiled wryly. "Sister, I'm not alone in this. Isn't Yamo interested in that position as well?" The entire imperial capital had heard how Dugu Yamo had tried to confess her love to Jun Linyuan, but ended up having her immortal flowers taken by Feng Wu. Because of that, Dugu Yamo had become the laughingstock of the whole city. Mrs. Dugu was furious when Mrs. Swa brought that up. She asked, "Sister, what's that supposed to mean?" Mrs. Swa immediately waved her hands. "Sister, please don't be mad. I mean no disrespect. It's just that everyone simply hates Feng Wu's guts and they want to throttle her with their bare hands. Sister, don't you feel that way as well?" Mrs. Dugu snorted. Mrs. Swa tried to play nice. "Sister, how about we work together?" Mrs. Dugu narrowed her eyes and stared at Mrs. Swa without saying a word. Mrs. Swa smiled. "Sister, don't you want to get revenge for Yamo? I heard that Yamo was devastated and even tried to kill herself at home. What a pity." Dugu Yamo was Mrs. Dugu's favorite, and the girl's tantrum had turned the household upside down. The mood in the manor was quite depressing and restless. Dugu Yamo had tried to kill herself by smashing her head against a wall, but she failed, and there was now a big swollen lump on her forehead. It was quite a sorry sight. At that thought, Mrs. Dugu gritted her teeth. "What are you proposing?" She stared at Mrs. Swa. Mrs. Swa leaned closer and whispered something in Mrs. Dugu's ear. Mrs. Dugu looked a little relieved, but she still felt doubtful. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Swa was very confident. "With both of us working on it, of course. If it doesn't work, we can always ask the Empress for help." The Empress was from the Dugu family, and Mrs. Dugu was her sister-in-law, so of course she would be on their side. Moreover, Mrs. Swa smiled a little. "Sister, haven't you noticed? Her Majesty the Empress Dowager doesn't like Feng Wu either." Mrs. Dugu nodded and sighed. "That Feng Wu has really turned into everyone's target. She's going to have it very tough on this trip. Because it wasn't just the two of them who wanted to get rid of Feng Wu. Everyone just hates her." Mrs. Dugu smiled. Granny Gong ran at top speed to Jun Linyuan. In fact, the Crown Prince had been agitated ever since the Empress Dowager took Feng Wu away. He couldn't even clear his mind during his daily meditation. "Your Royal Highness," Feng alerted him from outside the carriage. The Crown Prince didn't reply. After a pause, Feng went on. "Her Majesty doesn't like Miss Wu. I'm afraid she's going to face some very difficult times." Jun Linyuan snorted. "She's so unruly. She needs the lesson." Feng was speechless. He thought, so be it. "Your Royal Highness, I hope you won't regret it later." Granny Gong hastily arrived at that moment. "Your Royal Highness, help! Her Royal Highness has taken out the medium redness and is going to flog Miss Wu." Granny Gong was worried sick. The medium redness? The large one could kill a person, while the medium one could destroy a person's hands. The stubborn Jun Linyuan suddenly got to his feet, almost breaking the ceiling of the carriage. He raised the curtain and walked out without another word. Feng rolled his eyes. Despite his stubbornness, the teenager still had to go save his girl in the end. Chapter 1470 Untitled. Chapter 1470 Untitled. Jun Linyuan's long legs took him to the Empress Dowager's carriage in no time. "Stop!" he yelled furiously. His arrival brought an unbelievable pressure down on everyone's shoulders. His bellows were like a thunderclap, and the entire procession stopped involuntarily. The Empress Dowager almost had a heart attack. Her face went pale as she stared at Jun Linyuan in astonishment. It took her a while to realize who it was, and only then did she pat her chest and let out a breath of relief. "You brat! You almost frightened me to death." Jun Linyuan's gaze was on Feng Wu as soon as he walked in. Right now, Feng Wu had been forced to her knees, and the angry and stubborn look in her eyes reminded him of a young beast. Her hair and clothes were disheveled, and there were light finger marks on her face. Jun Linyuan could imagine what had happened. Someone had tried to slap her, and she failed to dodge completely, hence the marks. This girl. It pained him to see the stubborn look in her eyes. Without another word, Jun Linyuan walked up to her, bent down, and gave her his hand. The crown prince had given Feng Wu his hand. Everyone envied Feng Wu so much. But, to their disbelief, Feng Wu smacked his hand away. She smacked him. Someone actually dared do that to the crown prince? No one was more astonished than the Empress Dowager. How dare that girl do such a thing to her Junjun? She wouldn't stand for it. Meanwhile, because the carriages had stopped, everyone turned their attention to this section. Everyone here was sharp-eared, and they all heard the noise from the Empress Dowager's carriage. They were all surprised. Mrs. Zhua and Mrs. Dugu were the most astonished of them all. "Get her out of here and chop her head off!" the Empress Dowager yelled angrily. Everyone outside heard that shout. Mrs. Zhua and Mrs. Dugu's carriage was the closest, so they both heard it. They exchanged looks, and both rejoiced over Feng Wu's predicament. Luck was on their side. They didn't even have to do anything, and the Empress Dowager already despised Feng Wu so much. She wanted Feng Wu dead. Hence, the two ladies stopped talking and pricked their ears. And they weren't the only ones. Lady Wang and the other members of the Feng clan were also in shock. Feng Wu had offended the Empress Dowager, which was the worst news. The Feng clan was going to be incriminated. What should they do? However, to their utter surprise, Jun Linyuan didn't get angry at Feng Wu. Instead, he looked at her in resignation. "Are you an idiot?" Jun Linyuan jabbed Feng Wu's forehead with one long finger before pulling her to her feet. He then tucked her under his arm and carried her away. Feng Wu was dumbfounded. "Hey! Jun Linyuan! Put me down! Put me down now!" Feng Wu hit Jun Linyuan with her fist. But it simply didn't make a difference. Chapter 1471, Untitled. Chapter 1471, Untitled. Right now, Feng Wu was so angry and frustrated that she wanted to pinch Jun Linyuan on his waist. And that was what she did. However, his muscles were simply too hard for Feng Wu to make an impact. What a bummer! Frustrated, Feng Wu bit down on Jun Linyuan's arm. Her teeth almost chipped. It hurt a lot. Tears filled her eyes. Feng Wu kicked and scratched. But Jun Linyuan still carried her away. A lot of people had lifted their curtains to see what was going on, and they were all astonished. That was especially the case for the Empress Dowager. Right now, her mind was in such a mess that she could only stare blankly into the air. Until she collapsed in her seat. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" Granny Lon held the old lady's hand and pressed her philtrum. She cried out anxiously, "Your Majesty! Wake up!" The old lady slowly woke up. Her eyes were still unfocused. Junjun. Junjun. She was so shocked that she couldn't form a coherent sentence. "His Royal Highness has left. Your Majesty, please calm down. We can talk about it. Don't get angry," Granny Lon comforted her in a low voice. How can Junjun tolerate that girl?" The Empress Dowager's voice shook. Granny Lon said, "Well, he let that girl do all those unruly things." Granny Lon said, "Well, why?" The old lady wouldn't accept the fact and was furious. "After everything I've done to raise my baby, he let that annoying girl kick and punch him. Who the hell does she think she is, huh? She's nothing." Granny Lon tried to calm her down. "Your Majesty, young people have their own way of doing things, so how about we leave it to them to sort out?" "No way." The old lady waved her hand angrily. "That girl has such a seductive face, and it's so obvious that Junjun is under her spell. That's why he's been indulging her. No, I can't let that girl stay close to the Crown Prince anymore." Granny Lon didn't know what to say. Somehow, she felt that little Feng Wu was the one getting ordered around here. But she knew that the old lady hated Feng Wu at the moment, so she chose to remain silent. The Empress Dowager fumed for the rest of the journey, and the entire procession was enveloped in an oppressive atmosphere. That was until they reached the outpost. With the Emperor in the convoy, everything had to be elaborate. The outpost acted as a halfway residence for traveling officials, and wasn't exactly a comfortable place to stay overnight. Since Emperor Wu was visiting, the place had been cleaned inside out and revamped. Lord Mu was in charge of all the meals and accommodations. While Emperor Wu and his family settled down in the outpost, the rest of his entourage set up tents in the area nearby. The tents were set up around the outpost in perfect order. Emperor Wu, the Empress Dowager, and Jun Linyuan each had a building of their own, but the same couldn't be said for the rest of the convoy. In Jun Linyuan's carriage, Feng Wu had been kicking and biting ever since Jun Linyuan carried her off in front of everyone. She decided that had it not been for this guy, she would never have been threatened by the Empress Dowager and stared at like a circus monkey. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became, and the more she wanted to bite Jun Linyuan. Chapter 1472, Untitled. Chapter 1472, Untitled. But Jun Linyuan's muscles were too hard for her to bite, which only made Feng Wu angrier. She glared at him like an angry squirrel. However, Jun Linyuan only found the frustrated look on her face adorable, and he couldn't help but pinch her little ear. Feng Wu stared at Jun Linyuan in utter disbelief. She was furious, and he actually pinched her ear. And what was with that goofy smile on his face? Feng Wu didn't know what to do. Jun Linyuan, what on earth do you want? Instead of answering her, the crown prince threw her over his shoulder and walked out of the carriage. Hey, Jun Linyuan, put me down or I'm really going to be mad. Feng Wu blushed. Before, when Jun Linyuan carried her away, there hadn't been many people around. But now, nearly everyone had gotten out of their carriages, and there were people everywhere. How could Jun Linyuan still do this? God knew how embarrassing this was. Moreover, looking up, Feng Wu saw Emperor Wu coming out of his carriage, accompanied by Empress Dugu and concubine Oriole. Emperor Wu saw Jun Linyuan, and his eyes widened in amazement. What the heck? Emperor Wu stumbled and almost tripped. Your Majesty, the chief steward immediately caught Emperor Wu by the arm and steadied him. Emperor Wu drew in his breath. Jun Linyuan. The arrogant, unapproachable Jun Linyuan was doing such a thing. That just wasn't something he was supposed to do. Am I seeing things? Emperor Wu blinked and opened his eyes wider. But he wasn't mistaken. Jun Linyuan was indeed marching forward with Feng Wu over his shoulder. Stop! Emperor Wu stopped Jun Linyuan. Right now, the atmosphere felt rather strange. Jun Linyuan paused, turned around, and looked at Emperor Wu in bewilderment. Emperor Wu was furious. That brat! What is this? Acting so inappropriately in broad daylight? Emperor Wu stared at Jun Linyuan. Put her down now! However, to Emperor Wu's frustration, Jun Linyuan only gave him an indifferent glance before marching off with Feng Wu over his shoulder. That was a direct order from Emperor Wu, an imperial edict. But Jun Linyuan, he openly disobeyed it. Everyone stared at Jun Linyuan from behind before they glanced at Emperor Wu. Emperor Wu could clearly sense his imperial halo dimming a little at that moment. And Jun Linyuan's prestige rose yet again. Your Majesty. Empress Dugu saw it as well, so she tugged at Emperor Wu's sleeve and whispered, His Royal Highness may not realize the impact of his conduct, but this is going to severely challenge your authority, which was very hard to build up. His Royal Highness isn't a child anymore. How can he still be so willful? He's not being willful. He's deliberately weakening my authority, Emperor Wu said resentfully. Empress Dugu was delighted. She was right. There was already a wedge between the father and son, and she had to make good use of the opportunity. Hence, Empress Dugu started making her little speech as she walked alongside Emperor Wu, and only the two of them knew what she said. In the Empress Dowager's room. Arg! Pressing her fingers to her temples, the old lady rolled around in bed in pain. Chapter 1473 Untitled. Chapter 1473 Untitled. Granny Lon was worried sick. She asked, "Your Majesty, how do you feel?" It was already too painful for the Empress Dowager to speak, and she could only grunt in agony. Granny Lon panicked and ran out of the room. While she sent the palace maids to fetch the imperial physicians, she herself went to report to Emperor Wu. Empress Dugu was listing Jun Linyuan's vices, when Emperor Wu heard the noise outside. He immediately frowned. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty! Her Majesty the Empress Dowager is coming down with something, and she can't even speak now." Granny Lon had served the Empress Dowager for many years and was a well-respected figure in the palace. That was why she could see the Emperor right away. Hearing this, Emperor Wu rose to his feet and threw a robe over his shoulders as he walked out. "What's going on? What's wrong with the Empress Dowager?" Emperor Wu asked. Granny Lon was so anxious that her face was pale. "Her Majesty hasn't been feeling well since she got out of the carriage. She threw up once and went to bed without having any dinner. Right now, she's in so much pain that she can't even speak." Emperor Wu was a well-known filial son, and he was running as fast as he could now. He asked anxiously, "Where are the imperial physicians? Where are Master Chu and Master Bai? I've sent someone to fetch them. They should be here by now." Granny Lon didn't sound much calmer herself. After all, this involved the Empress Dowager's health, and it was too big a deal. So, when Emperor Wu arrived, Master Chu and Master Bai were already there. "Master Chu." Emperor Wu walked in to see Master Chu opening his eyes as he finished checking the Empress Dowager's pulse. "How is Her Majesty?" Emperor Wu grabbed Master Chu by the collar. Master Chu looked a little pale, but his voice was relatively calm. "Your Majesty, Her Majesty's brain disease is flaring up, which is affecting her entire body." "Get to the point," Emperor Wu bellowed. Master Chu said sympathetically, "Your Majesty, Her Majesty's condition is very difficult to treat, and I don't have much confidence in myself." "How's that even possible? Aren't you the most skilled physician in the palace? How can you say that?" Emperor Wu yelled angrily. Master Chu said, "Your Majesty, we physicians aren't omnipotent." Emperor Wu said, "I don't care. Make sure Her Majesty is all right, or I'll have your head on a plate." Master Chu almost broke down. "But Your Majesty, there's only a 10% success rate, and I'm worried that even if I cure her now, she may still suffer from residual symptoms." Emperor Wu snorted. "Like I said, I don't care what method you use. I just want Her Majesty to be fine." Master Chu was almost driven mad. The Emperor ignored Master Chu and rushed inside to check on the Empress Dowager. Meanwhile, Master Chu almost pulled all his hair out. "Master!" Master Bai had remained silent so far, but he suddenly spoke gingerly. Master Chu was too absorbed in his agony to notice. "Master, there's someone who might be able to help us." "Who?" Master Chu frowned. "Miss Feng Wu," Master Bai said solemnly. "Miss Feng Wu is a great doctor, and she cured the Empress Dowager the last time she had a brain condition. So, maybe she'll know what to do this time." Master Chu frowned. "Are you sure?" Master Bai patted his chest and promised, "Miss Feng Wu is definitely a better doctor than the both of us, and I'm sure she'll know how to treat the Empress Dowager." Chapter 1474 Untitled. Chapter 1474 Untitled. Master Chu, we're running out of ideas here. Miss Feng Wu is our only hope. Master Bai said anxiously. Her Majesty won't last much longer. Master Chu sighed. In that case, go ahead. Yes. Master Bai dashed off after obtaining Master Chu's permission. The building which the Crown Prince was in was a restricted area. However, after Master Bai explained the Empress Dowager's perilous situation, he was soon given permission to enter. Inside, Feng Wu and Jun Linyuan were sitting opposite each other. Feng Wu was in a fit of pique, and the Crown Prince looked equally angry. Neither of them were speaking to each other. That was what Master Bai saw when he walked into the room. To Master Bai's astonishment, Feng Wu, the rumored little maid, was sitting opposite the Crown Prince like his equal. What was more, she was giving the Crown Prince attitude. That was unbelievable. Jun Linyuan stared at Master Bai. Master Bai didn't dare delay, and he immediately got to the point. Her Majesty the Empress Dowager isn't feeling well. Miss Wu, help. Jun Linyuan frowned. He was never an affectionate person, but he still cared about the Empress Dowager. What happened? Jun Linyuan asked, his face darkening. Master Bai repeated the diagnosis, then concluded, Her Majesty was probably upset by what happened earlier today, hence the relapse. Jun Linyuan didn't know what to say. Miss Feng Wu, please go have a look at the Empress Dowager. Otherwise, Her Majesty may not be able to survive. Jun Linyuan glanced at Feng Wu. Feng Wu didn't want to, because the Empress Dowager hadn't exactly been nice to her, and she wasn't one to hesitate to get revenge. However, beggars couldn't be choosers, and Feng Wu was fully aware of that. If she turned a blind eye to the Empress Dowager, and she really died, the consequences would be very severe. God really liked to play tricks on her. Rubbing her numb temples, Feng Wu rose to her feet and said in resignation, I'll go with you and have a look. Elated, Master Bai immediately led the way. Feng Wu walked past Jun Linyuan without saying a word. In the Empress Dowager's building, Emperor Wu narrowed his eyes as soon as he saw Feng Wu. Feng Wu had left a good impression on Emperor Wu. However, Jun Linyuan's ambiguous attitude toward Feng Wu made Emperor Wu involuntarily dislike her. Seeing Feng Wu, Master Chu immediately said, Miss Feng Wu's skills are as good as mine. With her help, we'll have a much better chance of curing Her Majesty. Emperor Wu stared at Feng Wu for a while and eventually nodded. Master Chu was very relieved. But, to Master Chu's surprise, while Emperor Wu gave his permission, the Empress Dowager didn't. No. I won't let that girl treat me. Get her out of here. Kick her out. I don't want to see her. Go away. The Empress Dowager reacted very violently when she knew that Feng Wu was going to be her doctor. Feng Wu frowned a little. She didn't like treating the Empress Dowager either. She was a supreme-level medicine refiner and was usually respected by everyone. But now the old lady was so rude. Feng Wu said coldly, Your Majesty, you are indeed having a relapse. Not treating it won't kill you, but it'll do irreparable damage to your brain. It's your decision. Chapter 1475, Untitled. Chapter 1475, Untitled. How dare you curse me? You defiant
Chapter
girl.
1476,
Take her out and cut her head
Untitled.
off. Chapter
Feng Wu was
1476. She turned
Untitled.
around and shrugged
What
at
else
Emperor
could Lady
Wu.
Wang say?
It's not that I
She
don't
could only
want to
smile
treat the
bitterly
Empress
and
Dowager,
said,
but Her Majesty
Immediately,
won't allow me.
all the ladies
Please
gave
don't
Lady
blame
Wang
me
strange
when Her
looks.
Majesty's condition
Mrs. Wu
deteriorated.
feigned an indifferent
After
tone.
that, she
Lady
ignored
Wang,
the Empress
I've been
Dowager,
meaning to tell you
who was
something
drained
for a
of
long
all color
time,
from the pain,
but I've
and
hesitated
turned
to
to
do
leave.
so.
Emperor
Mrs.
Wu
Zhuo,
was dumbfounded.
feel free to speak
He
your
couldn't
mind.
imagine that someone
Lady
could
Wang
be as
forced
bold
herself
as
to
his
face the
defiant
questioning
son.
looks.
Feng Wu,
Isn't your Feng
Emperor
Wu
Wu
out of
bellowed.
line?
Mrs.
Wu
Wu paused and looked at
Is
Emperor
that how
Wu
the
in
Feng
resignation.
family raises their
Her
daughter?
Majesty is blessed.
Of course not.
And her condition
Before
isn't
Lady Wang could
life-threatening
reply,
for now. Feng
but
Wu
it will
said
get
loudly,
worse,
and she'll
Mrs.
be in
Zhua.
more and more pain.
Feng Wu is a vile
After
and
a
evil
pause,
person by
Feng
nature.
Wu added,
My
"When
family's
that happens,
teachings have
her
nothing to
condition
do
will
with
be
it."
so severe that
Lady
no
Wang
medicine
added,
will work on her.
"That girl went to
and there's
Northern
nothing
Border
I
City
will be
5
able
years
to do,
ago, and lived
Emperor
like a
Wu was
wild person
dumbfounded,
out there."
But he soon
It's
realized
not a
what she
surprise
said.
that she became so
"Then why
twisted.
are you still leaving?" Mrs.
Treat
Zhua
her
didn't
now.
expect to hear such a
Feng
reply.
Wu shrugged.
She
Her
had
Majesty
thought that Lady
won't
Wang
let
would
me.
be on Feng Wu's
Emperor
side.
Wu's face darkened.
If that was the case,
Treat her.
That made
That's an
things
order.
much easier.
With
No
no
other
other
choice.
choice.
Smiled. Feng
Lady
Wu went
Wang,
up to
to
the
be
Empress
honest,
Dowager and
Feng
said,
Wu's reputation
"Your Majesty,
isn't
I'm
exactly
going to
good
treat
at
you.
the moment."
Go away.
Lady Wang smiled
I would rather
bitterly.
die than have
Really?
you treat me.
Get
Mrs.
out.
Zhua said. The
That's
Empress
right.
Dowager didn't
Everyone's
try
been
to hide
saying
her
that
resentment
Feng Wu
of
is
Feng
the
Wu.
Crown Prince's bed-warming
Feng Wu
maid,
looked at Emperor
but she's
Wu
the
in
daughter of the
resignation.
Feng family.
The patient
How
is
is
out of
she
control,
ever going to get
which will
married?
hasten the deterioration.
Lady Wang smiled
Her
wryly.
Majesty is
That's
only
true.
going to make herself
I've talked to
worse.
her about it, but
Emperor Wu was
she hesitated
furious,
before
but there
she
was
finished
nothing
her
he
sentence.
could do. This was
In
such
the
a
end,
good chance
Feng
to
Wu
slander
left.
Feng Wu
It was
that
a
she
very
didn't want to
difficult
waste
night
it.
for the Empress
At
Dowager.
that thought,
and
Lady
she
Wang
almost
smiled in
passed out
resignation
from the pain
and said,
several times.
"That girl wanted
The
to be
second
His
day,
Royal Highness's
things
maid,
only got
and
worse.
nothing we said could
The old
stop
lady
her.
couldn't even
What else
get up.
could we do?"
She kept making
Wow.
incoherent sounds
That shocked a lot
and
of
one
the ladies.
could tell from her pale
They
face
thought that Feng
and
Wu
trembling
stayed
body
with
that she
Jun
was in
Linyuan
extreme
because
pain.
he forced her to.
Emperor
But
Wu
judging
kept
from
giving
Lady
Master
Wang's
Chu
tone,
more pressure.
the Crown Prince
But what
hadn't
could
forced
Master
Feng
Chu
Wu
do?
at all.
He had to
She
go
was
to
the
Feng
one
Wu
who wouldn't
repeatedly.
leave him alone.
Feng Wu
Really?
came several
Feng
times,
Wu offered
but the
to be
Empress
his
Dowager
Royal
just
Highness's
wouldn't
maid
let
herself?
It was the
Mrs.
same
Dugu
thing
asked
all over
casually.
again.
Lady
On the
Wang
third
gave
morning,
them a bitter
the
smile.
Empress Dowager
I
was
shouldn't be saying
practically
this,
unconscious.
but that girl
she
is
was
so
too
willful
dizzy
and
to
arrogant,
even open her eyes.
and she's constantly
She
giving
really
me
could
headaches.
die if they didn't
She's
do
fatherless,
anything.
and her mother
Meanwhile,
is mentally ill.
all the families
Her
of the
uncle
officials
and I have
had
tried to
gathered
keep
around
her
the
in
Empress
line,
Dowager's
but she's
courtyard
just so
and were
impossible.
Therefore,
It was as if
we
the
can
air
only
had
let her
frozen.
do whatever she
Is
wants.
Her Majesty
There's
sick?
nothing we can do.
We've only
even
been
if we
here
want
for a
to.
short while.
Those
and Her
words
Majesty
made the
is
other
already
ladies
sick.
exchange
The
amazed
winter
looks.
hunt is going to
So,
be suspended.
Feng Wu had really
That's
volunteered
not the
to
main
be the Crown
consequence,
Prince's little
but
maid,
the possibility
she was
that
so
Her Majesty
infatuated.
may.
Immediately,
Have you heard?
the ladies that
Feng
had liked
Wu was
Feng
invited
Wu before
inside.
all frowned.
What's she
They
doing
all
there?
looked down on a girl
Isn't she
without
supposed to be a
self-respect.
good doctor?
I didn't
I
know
think
Feng
she's
Wu
here
was
to
like
treat
that.
the Empress Dowager.
I used to think quite highly
I'm going
of
to
her.
laugh.
As it
She's
turned
just
out,
a girl.
she was
good
telling
doctor?
everyone that
Give
His
me a
Royal
break.
Highness forced her to stay with
When
him.
the ladies were
But
together,
being
they
in love
whispered
with the
among
Crown
themselves,
Prince isn't
and
all
Feng
that
Wu
bad,
was the main
but only a
topic of
despicable
conversation.
person would pretend to be
isn't
all
it Lady
innocent.
Wang?
While the others
Soon,
expressed
they
their
noticed
disdain
that Feng
toward
Yanfeng's
Feng Wu,
wife was there
Mrs.
as well.
Zhua and Mrs.
Lady
Dugu
Wang
exchanged
didn't have
excited
anywhere
looks.
to hide and soon became the center of attention. Mrs. Zhua's eyes flickered when she saw Lady
Chapter
Wang,
1477
and she smiled. Lady Wang,
Chapter
Feng Wu
1477
is the fifth daughter of your clan,
Untitled.
isn't she? That was a surprise. Lady Wang was actually on their side. At that thought, they became much nicer to Lady Wang, so much so that other people might take them for real sisters. While they were engaged in excited discussion, the Empress Dowager was getting worse. She was barely conscious and was slipping into a coma. Emperor Wu was so anxious that he didn't stop pacing. He suddenly turned around and stared at Master Chu, who had just come out of the room. "How's Her Majesty doing? Speak." Master Chu furrowed his brow and was full of resignation. "Your Majesty, Miss Feng Wu predicted everything." "What?" Emperor Wu stared at Master Chu. Master Chu immediately said, "Miss Feng Wu said a few days ago that Her Majesty's condition would get worse, and so would the damage to her brain. Miss Feng Wu was correct about everything, and Her Majesty's condition is very severe now. Your Majesty, Miss Feng Wu is the only one who can treat Her Majesty now. Otherwise we may lose her." A hush fell over the room. Emperor Wu stared at Master Chu in anger and frustration. Master Chu stressed, "Your Majesty, Miss Feng Wu is our only hope now. No one else can save Her Majesty now." Emperor Wu bellowed, "Go get her then." Master Chu nodded and quickly left. However, Master Chu arrived at Jun Linyuan's building only to find that Feng Wu wasn't there. For the first time, he panicked. He stared at Granny Gong and said anxiously, "What are we going to do now? His Majesty is waiting for her. How can she not be here now?" Her Majesty's life was in danger. Granny Gong gave it some thought and said, Miss Feng Wu gave me a letter before she left and told me to give it to you when you came. Master Chu took the letter and quickly opened it. One look and he was over the moon. He dashed off with the letter. Master Chu ran through the corridor like a gust of wind and rushed into the Empress Dowager's building. Your Majesty, Her Majesty is going to be all right. Master Chu sounded excited when he said, Miss Feng Wu left us this treatment and I've read it. If we follow these instructions, there's a 70% chance of saving Her Majesty. Where's Feng Wu? Emperor Wu was displeased. The Empress Dowager's life was on the line. Where was she? Well, I heard that she's away. As for where she went, I didn't ask. All of Master Chu's attention was on Feng Wu's letter. Her Majesty is seriously ill with her life hanging in the balance, and Feng Wu thinks she can go out just like that? Damn her! Emperor Wu bellowed. Master Chu raised the letter in his hand. Your Majesty, Miss Feng Wu might think that this letter alone is enough to save Her Majesty, so the success rate will be more than 70% if she does it herself. She has no respect for Her Majesty or the royal family at all. She was as arrogant as Jun Linyuan. The more Emperor Wu thought about it, the angrier he became. He then bellowed, Bring Feng Yanfeng here right now. Hence, when Master Chu went to treat the Empress Dowager, Feng Yanfeng was brought in, and he looked completely confused. Your Majesty, Feng Yanfeng bowed as soon as he saw Emperor Wu. Meanwhile, all the people outside the building were murmuring among themselves as well. Why does His Majesty want to see Master Feng so suddenly? Master Feng has always behaved himself. Did something happen? Plus, it was the chief steward, His Majesty's most capable servant, who went to fetch Master Feng. Chapter 1478, Untitled. Chapter 1478, Untitled. Plus, it was the chief steward, His Majesty's most capable servant, who went to fetch Master Feng. The mood felt rather heavy. Master Zhua, Master Dugu, Lord Mu, and many other people were all confused. They all wanted to know what on earth was happening inside. In the building, Feng Yanfeng had only just knelt down, when Emperor Wu raised a leg and kicked Feng Yanfeng in the chest. Feng Yanfeng felt a stabbing pain in his chest. Before he knew it, he was flying backward. He flew all the way out of the building. Wow! It happened so suddenly that everyone outside was astonished. What did Master Feng do to offend His Majesty? Master Feng is the Minister of the Ministry of Official Personnel. What unforgivable thing did he do to deserve such humiliation? It seems that we're going to have a new minister. Feng Yanfeng was the most baffled of them all. It never occurred to him that His Majesty would be so angry and so merciless. The moment Feng Yanfeng flew out of the building, Lady Wang ran over to his side, held his thigh, and burst into tears. Master, are you all right? Master, what happened? Master! Feng Yanfeng didn't lose control. He brushed Lady Wang's hand off and scrambled to his feet. He then walked up to Emperor Wu and knelt down. Your Majesty, I don't know what I did to deserve that punishment, but I hold no resentment. But Your Majesty, could you maybe tell me what I did wrong? Humph! Emperor Wu stood there with an expressionless face, his eyes as cold as ice. A member of your clan made a mistake, and as the head of the clan, you have to take the fall. I'm removing you from your office, starting from today. Do you have a problem with that? Emperor Wu didn't say the exact words, but he dropped enough hints. Feng Yanfeng got it after his initial shock and asked, Is it because of Feng Wu? Emperor Wu didn't answer that question and only waved his hands. Get out! Once he had taken care of Feng Yanfeng, Emperor Wu crossed his hands behind his back and walked back inside. But he might have left, but the impact was enough to make everyone wonder. Feng Wu. It's all because of her. Lady Wang finally realized what had happened and started yelling at Feng Yanfeng. Master, did you just get dismissed because of Feng Wu? Feng Yanfeng was still processing what had happened. He had just lost his job, and it was because of Feng Wu. At that moment, Feng Yanfeng felt like throttling Feng Wu. Damn her! Damn that girl! Feng Yanfeng almost passed out from rage. People of the Zhua and Dugu families exchanged looks and reveled in his predicament. Sister, that's so hilarious, ha ha! Mrs. Zhua held Mrs. Dugu's hand and laughed wholeheartedly. Luck really is on our side. I didn't expect Feng Yanfeng to be kicked out so easily. Mrs. Dugu nodded. But why? Mrs. Zhou was confused. What did Feng Yanfeng do to upset His Majesty so much? Or rather, what did Feng Wu do? Because of her relationship with the Empress, Mrs. Dugu had more information. I'll tell only you. Mrs. Dugu told Mrs. Zhua. I heard that Feng Wu could have treated Her Majesty when she got sick, but Feng Wu went off to enjoy herself and abandoned Her Majesty. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.